Jerusalem was still standing. The temple still dominated the city. Priests still carried out sacrifices. Worshippers still entered sacred courts. Festivals still marked the calendar. Prayers were still spoken, and the people of Judah could still look back on a history filled with extraordinary promises. They were the descendants of Abraham. They belonged to the covenant people. Jerusalem was the city associated with David, and the house of David still occupied the throne. From the outside, the story could appear secure. But the book of Isaiah opens by tearing through that appearance. Something was deeply wrong. The nation had not simply become politically vulnerable. It had become spiritually diseased. Worship continued, but justice was disappearing. Religious activity remained, but faithfulness was collapsing. The people knew the language of covenant while repeatedly violating the covenant itself. And Isaiah would spend decades standing inside that contradiction. He would speak to kings while empires moved across the ancient Near East. He would warn Jerusalem when almost no one wanted to hear warning. He would announce judgment when people assumed their religious identity would protect them. And beyond the judgment, he would describe a future involving a remnant, a coming ruler, a mysterious servant, the restoration of Zion, salvation reaching the nations, and eventually something far greater than the survival of one city. But before Isaiah can lead us toward comfort, restoration, or new creation, he forces us to look at the wound. Because the story of Isaiah does not begin with hope misunderstood. It begins with holiness ignored. The opening words identify Isaiah as the son of Amoz and place his prophetic ministry during the reigns of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah. That single introduction immediately stretches the story across a period of enormous change. Judah was the southern kingdom that remained after the united monarchy of Israel had divided generations earlier. Jerusalem was its capital. The dynasty of David still ruled there, carrying the weight of promises that reached back to the covenant God had made with David. To the north stood the separate kingdom of Israel, often called Ephraim in prophetic literature. Beyond both kingdoms, however, greater powers were gathering strength. The political map of the region was never stable for long. Smaller kingdoms survived by calculating alliances, paying tribute, resisting stronger rulers when possible, and trying to avoid becoming the next territory swallowed by an empire. During Isaiah's lifetime, one empire would rise above all others, Assyria. Its armies would become one of the defining realities of the prophet's world. But Isaiah's first accusation is not that Judah has failed militarily. It is that Judah has rebelled against God. The opening chapter reads almost like a covenant courtroom. Heaven and earth are summoned as witnesses. God describes Israel as children he raised who have rebelled against him. Then comes one of Isaiah's most cutting comparisons. An ox knows its owner. A donkey knows where it is fed. But Israel does not know. God's people do not understand. It is deliberately humiliating language. The prophet is not saying that Judah lacks information. These people possess traditions, priests, sacrifices, sacred places, and a national memory filled with stories of God's acts. Their problem is deeper. They possess knowledge without faithfulness. Isaiah then describes the nation through the image of a wounded body. From the head to the foot there is no soundness. Only injuries, welts, and untreated wounds. The image is powerful because political and spiritual conditions become almost impossible to separate. The nation is not merely committing isolated sins. The whole society is suffering the consequences of prolonged rebellion. And then Isaiah does something that would have been deeply uncomfortable for a religious audience. He turns toward their worship. Sacrifices are being offered, incense is burning, assemblies are being held, prayers are being made, Yet God rejects the performance. Not because sacrifice itself had no place in Israel's covenant life. The sacrificial system belonged to the worship God had given Israel. The problem was that worship had become disconnected from life. Hands raised in prayer were also associated with wrongdoing. Sacred gatherings existed alongside oppression. Religious observance continued while the vulnerable were neglected. Isaiah's demand is not simply become more religious. Judah is already religious. The demand is transformation. Wash yourselves, remove evil, learn to do good. Seek justice, correct oppression, defend the fatherless, plead for the widow. Isaiah's message immediately exposes one of the central themes that will run through the entire book. True covenant faithfulness cannot be reduced to ritual while justice is abandoned. The temple cannot be used to hide a corrupt society. A sacrifice cannot purchase permission to continue rebellion. A sacred city is not automatically a faithful city. And yet even here at the beginning of Isaiah's accusation, judgment is not the only voice. There is an invitation. Though sin is pictured in the deepest colors, cleansing remains possible. Judah is offered a choice between willing obedience and continued rebellion. That tension, judgment and mercy, warning and invitation, will never fully disappear from Isaiah. The prophet then looks at Jerusalem itself. The faithful city has become unfaithful. Justice, once associated with the city, has been displaced by corruption. Rulers are described as rebellious. Officials pursue personal gain. The orphan and widow, the very people whose treatment revealed whether power was being used righteously, are neglected. This is not merely private immorality. Isaiah is indicting institutions, leadership, economics, worship, and public justice. The problem has reached the structure of society. But again, the judgment is not pointless destruction. Isaiah presents divine judgment as something that will expose corruption and purify what has become contaminated. The city that has become unfaithful will not remain that way forever. Zion will one day again be associated with justice. Already in the first chapter, Isaiah establishes a pattern that will dominate everything that follows. Sin brings judgment. Judgment exposes what is false, and beyond judgment lies the possibility of restoration. Then the camera, so to speak, pulls back. Isaiah sees something far greater than Judah's immediate condition. He sees a future in which the mountain of the house of the Lord is exalted, and nations stream toward it. People from many nations call one another to go up and learn God's ways. Instruction goes out from Zion. The word of the Lord goes out from Jerusalem. Weapons are transformed into tools of cultivation. Nations no longer train for war. It is one of the most famous visions of peace in Scripture. But Isaiah places it beside the reality of a Judah that is anything but ready for such a future. That contrast matters. The future is magnificent. The present is corrupt. The destiny of Zion is peace among nations. The reality of Zion is injustice within its own streets. And between those two realities stands judgment. Isaiah will not allow his audience to seize the promise while refusing the transformation required by the holy God who gave it. This is why the book constantly moves between breathtaking hope and devastating warning. Isaiah sees what Zion can become. He also sees what Judah has become. The distance between them is the crisis. As the opening chapters continue, another danger comes into view: pride. Judah lives among wealth, military ambition, foreign influence, idols, and symbols of human power. Isaiah describes a coming day when everything exalted against God will be brought low. Human pride will collapse. The achievements that people believe make them secure will prove incapable of saving them. The prophet's attack is not against craftsmanship, prosperity, or political organization simply because they exist. His concern is misplaced trust. What happens when a people who claim to trust God actually build their confidence on wealth, weapons, alliances, status, and objects they have made with their own hands? Isaiah's answer is relentless. Whatever humanity exalts as ultimate will eventually be exposed as temporary. That message has enormous political implications for the chapters ahead. Because Judah will soon face choices about survival. Should it trust in military strength, foreign alliances, powerful empires, political calculations, or the God whose holiness Isaiah proclaims? At this point, those questions are still forming. Soon they will become matters of national life and death. The opening chapters also turn toward Jerusalem's leadership. Isaiah depicts instability and disorder, describing a society in which dependable leadership is being removed and arrogance spreads through the community. The language is severe because Judah's collapse is not presented as one sudden catastrophe caused by an enemy army. Long before walls fall, a society can begin collapsing internally. Leadership can decay. Justice can become negotiable. Wealth can become an idol. The powerful can exploit the weak. Religious language can survive after obedience has disappeared. An invading army may eventually expose the crisis. But the crisis began earlier. This is one of Isaiah's most uncomfortable insights. The destruction of a nation does not always begin when the enemy appears at the gate. Sometimes it begins while the gates still seem secure. Yet Isaiah interrupts these accusations with another unexpected promise. In the middle of judgment appears the image of the branch of the Lord, associated with beauty and glory and a purified Zion, over which God's protecting presence is described in language that echoes Israel's earlier wilderness story. Isaiah is already teaching us how to read him. Never assume that judgment is the entire story. But never use restoration to pretend judgment is unnecessary. The two belong together. God intends to preserve something through the fire, a remnant, a purified people, a restored Zion. But what exactly must be removed before restoration can come? Isaiah chapter 5 answers through a song. At first it sounds almost gentle. The prophet sings about someone who loved a vineyard. The owner chose fertile ground. He cleared the stones. He planted choice vines. He built a watchtower. He prepared a winepress. Everything that could reasonably be done for the vineyard had been done. Then the owner waited. He expected good grapes. Instead, the vineyard produced bad fruit. The tenderness of the opening suddenly becomes an accusation. What more could the owner have done? Why, after receiving such care, did the vineyard produce something so different from what was expected? Then Isaiah removes the metaphor. The vineyard is Israel. The people of Judah are the planting in which God delighted. God looked for justice. Instead, he found bloodshed. He looked for righteousness. Instead, he heard cries of distress. The wordplay in the Hebrew is sharper than English can easily reproduce, but the meaning is unmistakable. God expected a society shaped by covenant righteousness. What emerged was the opposite. Isaiah then pronounces a series of woes. They strike at greed. Landowners accumulate property until others are pushed aside. Pleasure becomes an obsession. People pursue drink while ignoring what God is doing. Moral categories are reversed. Evil is called good. Good is called evil. Darkness is presented as light, light as darkness. People become wise in their own eyes. Justice is corrupted by bribery. The innocent are denied what is right. These are not random sins placed in a list. Together they reveal a civilization losing its moral center. Possession replaces stewardship. Pleasure replaces awareness. Self-confidence replaces wisdom. Corruption replaces justice, and language itself begins to break down when good and evil can simply be renamed according to convenience. The vineyard has not failed because it received nothing. It failed after receiving extraordinary care. That is what makes Isaiah's accusations so severe. Judah had a history, a covenant, a law, a priesthood, a temple, a royal line, prophets, stories of deliverance, promises. None of those privileges made rebellion harmless. Greater light meant greater responsibility. And now the consequences were approaching. Isaiah describes nations being summoned from far away. An army comes with terrifying speed and discipline. The imagery is meant to destroy complacency. Judah cannot assume that because judgment has not yet arrived, judgment will never arrive. The world around Jerusalem is changing. Assyria is becoming stronger. Regional politics are becoming more dangerous. The northern kingdom will face disaster. Judah itself will eventually look out from its fortified city and see an imperial army that has crushed almost everything in its path. But before we arrive there, Isaiah's story must move somewhere more personal. So far, the prophet has exposed the people, their worship, their rulers, their wealth, their injustice, their pride, their false security. Their vineyard has been examined, and the fruit has been found rotten. But a question remains. Who is this man speaking with such authority? What gives Isaiah the right to stand before kings, priests, officials, and an entire nation and declare that they have misunderstood their own condition? The answer does not begin with Isaiah's confidence. It begins with Isaiah being shattered. The next scene will not take place first in a battlefield, a royal council, or a foreign court. It will begin in the year a king dies. A throne on earth will become empty, and Isaiah will suddenly see another throne, high, exalted, surrounded by beings crying out words that reveal the deepest truth behind everything he has already said. Before Isaiah can carry the message of judgment to Judah, he must discover that he himself cannot stand untouched before the holiness he proclaims. The nation has been exposed. Now the prophet will be exposed. And in that encounter, the entire book of Isaiah will change. The year King Uzziah died, Judah lost a king. Isaiah saw another. The contrast could not have been sharper. For decades, Uzziah had represented stability. His reign had been long, prosperous, and militarily successful for much of its course. Judah had known expansion, agricultural strength, fortified cities, and a degree of security that could easily create the illusion that the kingdom's foundations were permanent. But Uzziah died. Every human throne eventually empties. Kings age. Armies weaken. Political systems change. And the death of a ruler can make an entire nation suddenly aware of how fragile its stability really is. It was in that year that Isaiah received the vision that would define his ministry. He saw the Lord seated on a throne high and exalted. The train of his robe filled the temple. Above him were seraphim, mysterious heavenly beings described with 6 wings. With 2 they covered their faces. With 2 they covered their feet. With 2 they flew. And they called to one another, Holy, Holy, Holy. The repetition is overwhelming. Isaiah has spent the opening chapters exposing Judah's corruption, but now the standard against which Judah is measured comes fully into view. God is holy. Not merely stronger than Judah, not merely wiser than its rulers, not merely one divine power among competing gods. Holy, utterly distinct, morally pure, unapproachable in majesty. The foundations of the thresholds shook at the sound of the voices, and the temple filled with smoke. Isaiah's reaction is immediate. He does not congratulate himself for being the prophet who understands what everyone else has missed. He collapses under the weight of what he sees. Woe is me! Until this moment in the book, Isaiah has repeatedly pronounced judgment on others. Now he pronounces it upon himself. He recognizes that he is a man of unclean lips, living among a people of unclean lips. The prophet is not standing outside Judah's problem. He belongs to the people he has been called to confront. And he has seen the King, the Lord of hosts. This is crucial to understanding Isaiah. His message of judgment is not born from personal superiority. It is born from a vision of holiness. The closer Isaiah comes to God, the less impressive his own righteousness appears. Then one of the seraphim flies toward him, carrying a burning coal taken from the altar. The coal touches Isaiah's lips. His guilt is removed. His sin is atoned for. The man who has confessed uncleanness is cleansed before he is commissioned. Only then does Isaiah hear the voice of the Lord. "Whom shall I send? Who will go for us?" Isaiah answers, "Here am I, send me." It sounds like the beginning of a triumphant prophetic mission. A cleansed messenger has volunteered. A holy God has commissioned him. Now surely the people will hear, repent, and return. But Isaiah's calling immediately becomes far more difficult. He is sent to a people who will hear without truly understanding and see without truly perceiving. The more the message confronts them, the more their resistance will be exposed. This passage has generated centuries of discussion because the language of hardening is severe. But within Isaiah's story, one reality is unmistakable. The prophet's ministry will not be measured by immediate popularity or widespread acceptance. He may speak faithfully and still be rejected. He may warn people who refuse to listen. He may describe the consequences with extraordinary clarity and still watch the nation continue toward them. Isaiah asks the natural question, how long? The answer is devastating. Until cities lie ruined, until houses are deserted, until the land is devastated, until the people are removed. The commission begins with a throne room and ends with images of national catastrophe. Yet even here there is something left, a stump. After a tree has been cut down, something remains in the ground. Isaiah uses the image of a surviving remnant. Judgment will be terrible, but annihilation will not be the final word. That image of a stump will return, and when it does, it will carry a hope far greater than Isaiah's audience can yet see. The prophetic calling has now been established, but Isaiah is not permitted to remain in the safety of a vision. The holiness he saw in the temple must now be spoken into politics, and the next crisis will involve one of Judah's kings, Ahaz. To understand what happens, we need to see the political trap closing around Jerusalem. The northern kingdom of Israel was still separate from Judah. Its king was Pekah. To the northeast, the kingdom of Aram, centered in Damascus, was ruled by Rezin. Both kingdoms faced the growing threat of Assyria. Assyria was expanding under aggressive rulers who intended to dominate the region. Smaller kingdoms had limited options. They could submit and pay tribute. They could rebel, or they could try to create coalitions strong enough to resist. Rezin of Aram and Pekah of Israel wanted Judah to join an anti-Assyrian alliance. Ahaz would not cooperate. So Aram and Israel turned against Judah. Their objective was not simply to pressure Jerusalem. Isaiah describes a plan to invade Judah, break its resistance, remove Ahaz, and install another ruler. For the house of David, this was more than a military emergency. It was a dynastic crisis. Enemies were threatening to replace the Davidic king. When news reached the royal house that Aram had allied itself with Ephraim, Isaiah says, "The heart of Ahaz and the hearts of his people shook like trees in a forest shaken by the wind." The king was afraid, and fear was about to reveal what he truly trusted. God sent Isaiah to meet Ahaz. The prophet did not come alone. He brought his son, Shear-Jashub. The name itself carried a message. a remnant shall return. Even Isaiah's family had become part of his prophetic ministry. Isaiah met Ahaz near the conduit of the upper pool at a place connected with Jerusalem's water system. The location is significant. A king facing siege would naturally think about defenses, water, fortifications, military preparation, survival. But Isaiah brought a message that challenged the king's entire approach to security. Do not be afraid. The two kings threatening Judah may look terrifying, but Isaiah describes them as little more than smoldering stubs of firewood. Their plan will not ultimately stand. Aram and Israel intend to destroy the Davidic dynasty. God says they will fail. Then Isaiah gives Ahaz a sentence that captures one of the great tensions of the entire book. If you do not stand firm in faith, you will not stand at all. The issue is larger than military strategy. What does Judah believe actually holds the kingdom together? An alliance, an army, a treaty, an empire, or the word of God? Ahaz is invited to ask for a sign, anything from the depths to the heights. The offer is extraordinary, but Ahaz refuses. His response sounds humble. He says he will not ask and will not test the Lord. Taken alone, those words might sound pious. But in context, this is not faithful restraint. God has explicitly offered a sign. Ahaz's refusal hides resistance behind religious language. He has already chosen another solution. Isaiah responds not merely to Ahaz as an individual, but to the house of David. And then comes one of the most famous passages in Isaiah. A young woman will conceive and bear a son, and his name will be called Immanuel, God with us. The passage must first be heard inside the crisis in which Isaiah spoke it. Ahaz is terrified that his enemies will destroy his kingdom and replace the Davidic line. The sign declares that the immediate political threat will not unfold as Ahaz fears. Before the child associated with the sign reaches a certain stage of maturity, the lands of the two kings Ahaz fears will be devastated. But the sign carries a double edge. God with us is comforting if God is your refuge. It is terrifying if you persist in rebellion. Because the Assyrian power Ahaz is tempted to use for protection will itself become an instrument of devastation. The rescue Ahaz seeks will come with a price, and that price will transform Judah's future. Historically, Ahaz chose the path of political dependence. Rather than resting in the prophetic word, he appealed to Assyria for help. From the perspective of short-term survival, the strategy seemed to work. Assyria moved against Aram. Damascus eventually fell. The northern kingdom of Israel was weakened and would later be destroyed. The coalition threatening Ahaz collapsed. Ahaz survived. But survival is not the same as faithfulness. And short-term success is not proof that a decision was wise. By calling Assyria into the crisis, Ahaz attached Judah more closely to the most dangerous imperial power in the region. The king who feared two smaller neighbors reached for a greater empire. Soon Judah would discover what happens when the power invited to solve your problem becomes powerful enough to control you. Isaiah's warnings now take on physical form through another child. The prophet is instructed to write a name, Maher-shalal-hashbaz. The meaning carries the sense that plunder is coming quickly. Before the child is old enough to speak, in the ordinary way the wealth of Damascus and the spoil of Samaria will be carried away by the king of Assyria. Again, the immediate enemies of Judah will fall. Again, Ahaz might be tempted to interpret their defeat as validation of his political choice. But Isaiah sees further. Assyria is compared to a mighty river overflowing its banks. Its waters will sweep through Judah. They will rise dangerously high. The empire that seemed useful will become overwhelming. Then Isaiah returns to the strange, powerful language Immanuel, God with us. The land itself is associated with that name. The crisis has widened. This is no longer merely about whether Ahaz can survive Rezin and Pekah. The question is whether Judah will learn what faith means before the flood of empire reaches Jerusalem itself. Isaiah also warns against adopting the fears of everyone around them. What the population calls conspiracy, the prophet is not necessarily to call conspiracy. What they fear, he is not to fear in the same way. The Lord is to be regarded as holy. The message leads directly back to Isaiah's vision in the temple. The God Isaiah saw upon the throne is the same God Judah must learn to trust in political crisis. Theology and history are not separate worlds in this book. What people believe about God determines what they do when armies approach. Fear becomes a test of worship, and trust becomes visible through decisions. But the darkness is deepening. Isaiah describes a people searching for guidance in forbidden places, consulting mediums and the dead rather than seeking their God. Instead of light, they encounter distress, darkness, and anguish. The language becomes almost suffocating. A land under pressure, a people confused, political fear, spiritual darkness, judgment approaching. The northern territories, including regions associated with Zebulun and Naphtali, had experienced humiliation. These lands were especially vulnerable to foreign invasion. They lay in the path of imperial armies. They knew what it meant for darkness to arrive from beyond the border. And precisely there, Isaiah introduces light. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. Those living in the land of deep darkness experience light shining upon them. Joy replaces oppression. The yoke is broken. The rod of the oppressor is shattered. Boots used in battle and garments stained in war are destined for burning. How can such a reversal happen? Isaiah answers with the birth of a child. A child is born. A son is given. Authority rests upon his shoulders. He is described with extraordinary royal titles, and his rule is associated with endless peace, justice, and righteousness upon the throne of David. The immediate political world of Isaiah is filled with disappointing kings. Uzziah's reign ended. Ahaz refuses faithful trust. The Davidic dynasty itself appears vulnerable. But Isaiah looks beyond the failures of the rulers before him toward an ideal Davidic reign. The contrast is deliberate. Ahaz trembles. This ruler establishes peace. Ahaz seeks protection through empire. This ruler breaks oppression. Human government is unstable. This promised rule is characterized by justice and righteousness. For Christian readers, this passage will become inseparable from the New Testament's presentation of Jesus. But within Isaiah's own developing story, we should first feel the problem the promise addresses. Judah needs more than a better military strategy. It needs righteous kingship. The house of David needs more than survival. It needs the kind of ruler who embodies what Davidic kingship was meant to become. But before that hope can dominate the story, Isaiah turns again toward judgment. Assyria rises like a weapon in God's hand. The empire will be used against a godless nation, yet Assyria does not understand itself as a servant carrying out a limited purpose. Its king boasts. He sees nations as objects to conquer. He treats kingdoms and their gods as trophies. He assumes his own strength has produced his victories. This creates another of Isaiah's great theological paradoxes. An empire can be used within divine judgment without being morally innocent. God's sovereignty over history does not transform imperial arrogance into righteousness. Isaiah compares Assyria to an axe boasting against the one who swings it. A tool has begun to imagine that it controls the hand. That arrogance will also be judged. The conqueror will not conquer forever. The destroyer will not stand outside judgment. This matters enormously, because if Assyria is simply unstoppable, then Judah's only rational choice is submission or alliance. But if Assyria itself stands beneath God's authority, then political reality is more complicated than military statistics. The empire is terrifying. It is not ultimate. Isaiah pictures Assyria cutting down nations like a forest. Great trees fall. The proud are brought low. And then, after the forest has been cut down, Isaiah returns to an image we have already seen, a stump. But this time the stump has a name, Jesse, David's father. A shoot will come from the stump of Jesse. A branch will grow from his roots. The Spirit of the Lord will rest upon him. Wisdom, understanding, counsel, might, knowledge, the fear of the Lord. This ruler does not judge by appearances or make decisions merely by what he hears. He judges the poor with righteousness. He gives justice to the vulnerable. Faithfulness characterizes him, and under his reign, Isaiah paints one of Scripture's most extraordinary pictures of peace. Wolf and lamb, leopard and young goat, calf and lion, a child among them. Predatory violence gives way to harmony. The earth is filled with the knowledge of the Lord as waters cover the sea. Whether every detail is read literally, poetically, or through the wider prophetic symbolism of restored creation, the central vision is unmistakable. Isaiah is imagining peace far beyond the temporary survival of Judah. Ahaz wants rescue from 2 kings. Isaiah sees a transformed world. Ahaz is trying to preserve his throne. Isaiah sees a ruler from David's line whose justice reaches the vulnerable and whose significance extends to nations. Ahaz reaches toward Assyria. Isaiah sees the nations gathering around a greater hope. This is why the book of Isaiah repeatedly feels as though it is moving on 2 horizons at once. There is the immediate horizon. Kings, armies, alliances, invasions, Jerusalem, Assyria. And beyond it is a larger horizon, a faithful Davidic ruler, a remnant, the nations worldwide, peace and the knowledge of God filling the earth. The prophetic vision does not erase history, it grows out of history. The failures of real kings create the question to which ideal kingship becomes the answer. The terror of real warfare makes Isaiah's vision of peace more than sentimental poetry. The destruction of forests makes the appearance of a shoot from a stump an image of impossible renewal. What looks dead may still contain a promise. Isaiah then speaks again of the remnant. Those who survive will no longer lean upon the one who struck them. That sentence reaches directly into the tragedy of Ahaz's decision. Judah had leaned upon Assyria. The supposed protector would become an oppressor. But a remnant will learn to lean upon the Lord. This is restoration at the level of trust. Not merely surviving catastrophe, learning from it, returning, reorienting the heart. Isaiah 12 then gives this movement a song. Judgment gives way to thanksgiving. Fear gives way to salvation. The people draw water with joy from the wells of salvation. They proclaim God's deeds among the nations. Zion is called to rejoice because the Holy One of Israel is in her midst. Once again, the book has traveled from holiness to judgment and then to hope. But the political consequences of Ahaz's choice have not disappeared. The shadow of Assyria remains. The northern kingdom is still moving toward catastrophe. Cities will fall. Populations will be displaced. Imperial armies will redraw the map. And Judah will learn that borrowing the strength of an empire can create obligations that outlive the crisis that first made the empire attractive. Ahaz feared destruction from 2 neighboring kings. He reached for Assyria. The immediate threat faded, but a far greater threat had now entered Judah's story. The king believed he had found a solution. Isaiah knew he had opened a door, and beyond that door stood an empire whose armies would eventually move through the land like floodwaters, leaving Jerusalem itself surrounded. Before that moment arrives, however, Isaiah's vision will expand far beyond Judah. One nation after another will enter the prophetic horizon. Babylon, Moab, Damascus, Egypt, Cush, Tyre, proud cities and powerful rulers. The question will no longer be only whether Judah can survive. A larger question is beginning to emerge. If God is truly the king Isaiah saw upon the throne, then what does that mean for every empire that believes history belongs to itself? The answer will shake far more than Jerusalem. Assyria had entered Judah's story as an ally. Isaiah knew it would not remain one. But before the prophet shows us the day when Assyrian soldiers stand almost within sight of Jerusalem, his vision suddenly expands. The horizon widens. Judah is no longer the only nation under examination. One kingdom after another enters Isaiah's prophetic courtroom. Babylon, Assyria, Philistia, Moab, Damascus, Cush, Egypt, Edom, Arabia, Tyre. Some are enemies of Judah, some are possible allies, some are commercial powers, some are military powers. Some seem almost untouchable. Yet Isaiah places all of them beneath the same throne he saw in the temple. The message is unsettling for every ruler who believes power makes him independent. History may appear to be shaped by kings, armies, trade routes, fortresses, and imperial ambitions, but Isaiah sees another reality. Empires rise, empires boast, empires conquer, and eventually empires are judged. The first great oracle in this section turns toward Babylon. At this point in Isaiah's historical world, Assyria is the dominant imperial threat. Babylon has not yet become the empire that will later destroy Jerusalem. That makes Babylon's appearance striking. Isaiah looks beyond the immediate crisis. He sees Babylon not merely as another city, but as a symbol of human greatness lifted against God. A banner is raised, forces gather. The day of judgment approaches. The language becomes cosmic. Stars are darkened. The sun is obscured. The heavens tremble. Prophetic language often uses the collapse of the heavens to describe the fall of kingdoms that seemed as permanent as the sky itself. To those living beneath imperial rule, an empire could feel like the structure of reality. Its king issued decrees. Its armies crossed borders. Its gods appeared on monuments. Its wealth filled cities. Its name made smaller nations tremble. Then suddenly the empire fell. The world had not literally ended, but for those whose entire political reality had been built around that power, it could feel as though the stars themselves had fallen. Isaiah announces that Babylon will not escape. Its splendor will become desolation. Its pride will be brought down. And from the fall of Babylon, the prophet moves to a poem of mockery directed against a fallen ruler. The tyrant who shook kingdoms has been brought to the grave. The one who imagined himself ascending above others has descended. The nations that once trembled now stare in disbelief. How did the oppressor become this weak? The passage contains the famous language about the Shining One falling from heaven, language that later Christian interpretation would often associate with Satan. But within Isaiah 14, the immediate taunt is directed against the arrogance of an earthly ruler traditionally understood in connection with the king of Babylon. That context matters. Isaiah is ridiculing imperial pride. A human ruler imagined himself almost divine. He sought elevation. He received humiliation. The pattern will recur throughout Scripture. Human power becomes most dangerous when it forgets that it is human. A throne begins to imagine it is eternal. A ruler begins to believe conquest proves moral superiority. Success becomes evidence in his own mind that no judgment can reach him. Then history turns, and the king who once commanded nations becomes another body in the dust. Isaiah's point is not simply that Babylon will lose a war. It is that pride contains the seed of its own downfall when it sets itself against God. But Babylon is not the only power addressed. Isaiah turns toward Assyria. The empire that Ahaz trusted will itself be broken. The Lord declares a purpose against it. The hand stretched out over the nations will not remain unchallenged. Once again, Isaiah refuses to allow Judah to divide the world into simplistic categories. Assyria may be used as an instrument of judgment. Assyria may defeat Judah's enemies. Assyria may even accomplish purposes Judah cannot yet understand. But Assyria does not therefore become righteous. An instrument can itself be judged. A conqueror can become the conquered. The axe cannot boast forever against the one who wields it. Then Isaiah speaks concerning Philistia. The political situation may change. A ruler may die. An oppressor may appear weakened. But Isaiah warns against celebrating too quickly. One threat can give rise to another. Political relief can be temporary. The collapse of one enemy does not mean history has suddenly become safe. This is one reason Isaiah's message is so difficult for kings. Kings want immediate answers. Which alliance should we choose? Which army is stronger? Which neighboring kingdom is weakening? Which treaty buys us time? Isaiah keeps forcing them to confront a deeper question. What are you trusting? Because the political map can change faster than the human heart. Then the prophecy turns eastward toward Moab. The tone changes. The judgment is severe, but the language is filled with grief. Cities are ruined. People flee. Refugees move through the land. Fields wither. Vineyards disappear. Songs of celebration cease. War is not presented as an exciting spectacle. Isaiah hears crying. He sees devastation. He describes communities collapsing. And, remarkably, the prophet's own heart seems to mourn for Moab. This matters because biblical judgment is sometimes misread as though the suffering of nations should be observed with emotional distance or pleasure. Isaiah does not always speak that way. He announces judgment and mourns what judgment looks like when it arrives. Families lose homes. Food disappears. Cities fall silent. People run. The devastation of pride is still devastation. In the middle of these words concerning Moab, another image appears. A throne established in steadfast love. A ruler from the tent of David who judges faithfully and seeks justice. Again, the Davidic hope interrupts the collapse of nations. Kings fail. Borders move. Refugees flee. But Isaiah's vision continues to return to righteous rule. The world's problem is not that it lacks rulers, it has many. The problem is that power is rarely joined perfectly to justice. Isaiah imagines something different. Then comes Damascus. And with Damascus Israel, the northern kingdom appears again. The alliance that once terrified Ahaz is heading toward destruction. Damascus will cease to be what it was. Ephraim's fortified cities will disappear. The northern kingdom's glory will fade. This is no longer merely a warning. The historical catastrophe is approaching. For generations, Israel had existed apart from Judah. Its kings had ruled from the north. Its capital, Samaria, seemed established. Its political identity had survived dynasties, wars, coups, and prophetic confrontations. But the northern kingdom had repeatedly refused the warnings brought by prophets. Now Assyria was closing in. Isaiah describes the result with the image of harvest. A field once full becomes almost empty. Only a few olives remain after the branches have been beaten. A remnant. The image appears again. Loss will be enormous, but not everything disappears. Why has disaster come? Isaiah returns to the issue beneath the politics. The people have forgotten the God of their salvation. They have not remembered the rock of their refuge. They plant beautiful things, they seek quick growth. But the harvest becomes grief. Human effort without covenant faithfulness cannot cure the deeper disease. Meanwhile, nations roar. Isaiah compares them to the roaring of many waters. The sound of empire is overwhelming. Armies can make individuals feel insignificant. A nation hears rumors of invasion, and suddenly ordinary life seems small. Markets, homes, vineyards, celebrations, all of it can vanish beneath military movement. Yet Isaiah says that God rebukes the nations, and they flee like chaff before the wind. This is the contrast that governs the entire section. From ground level, empires look enormous. From the throne Isaiah saw, they are not ultimate. Next, Isaiah turns south. Cush and Egypt enter the story. Their importance will grow because Judah will be tempted to look toward Egypt as a counterweight to Assyria. If Assyria is the great northern and eastern threat, perhaps Egypt can provide the balance. Perhaps horses, chariots, diplomats, and foreign armies can create security. From the standpoint of ordinary politics, this reasoning makes sense. Isaiah does not deny that nations possess real power. His argument is that Judah repeatedly mistakes real power for ultimate power. In Isaiah 18, messengers travel across waters. Diplomatic activity fills the scene, but above the frantic movements of nations, God is pictured observing quietly. Human diplomacy runs. God does not panic. Then Isaiah gives an oracle concerning Egypt. The imagery is extraordinary. The Lord comes against Egypt, and the idols of Egypt tremble. The nation's internal confidence breaks down. Civil conflict spreads. Its famous wisdom fails. Its leaders become confused. The Nile, the source of Egyptian agriculture and economic life, becomes part of the picture of distress. For centuries, Egypt had carried enormous symbolic weight in Israel's memory. It was the land of ancient oppression. It was also a sophisticated civilization, militarily significant and economically powerful. When Judah became afraid of Assyria, Egypt could look like salvation. Isaiah strips away that illusion. Egypt is not a god. Egypt can be shaken. Egypt can be confused. Egypt can suffer. Egypt can be judged. But then, as Isaiah so often does, he refuses to end where we expect. The prophecy moves beyond Egypt's humiliation to a future that would have sounded almost impossible. Egypt turns toward the Lord. Assyria is included. Israel stands between them. And Isaiah imagines a day when former enemies participate together in blessing. Egypt, Assyria, Israel. Three names loaded with memories of oppression, war, rivalry, and fear. Yet the prophetic vision speaks of them in relation to worship and blessing. My people, Egypt. Assyria, the work of my hands. Israel, my inheritance. The scope is staggering. Isaiah's God is not merely defending one small nation from every other nation. His purpose ultimately reaches beyond Judah. The nations can be judged, but the nations can also be gathered. This tension will become increasingly important later in the book. Judah's election was never permission for arrogance. The God of Israel claims authority over the whole earth. And if he judges the nations, he can also extend salvation to the nations. Then Isaiah himself becomes part of the prophetic sign. For a period, he walks stripped and barefoot as a sign concerning Egypt and Cush. The action is meant to shock. The nations Judah might trust for rescue will themselves experience humiliation before Assyria. Captives will be led away. The supposed rescuers will need rescue. And those who trusted them will ask a terrifying question. If this is what happened to the power we depended upon, how will we escape? That question is aimed directly at Judah. What happens when your backup plan collapses? What happens when the nation you assumed would save you cannot save itself? Isaiah is dismantling false refuge before the military crisis reaches its peak. Then the prophet turns again toward Babylon. A watchman stands. He sees riders. He waits. Finally comes the announcement, Babylon has fallen. For Isaiah's original world, Babylon's political role was complicated, and would become even more important later. But in the structure of the book, Babylon is already emerging as a power whose future greatness will not save it from eventual collapse. The watchman image creates tension. Someone is stationed on the wall while history approaches from the darkness. News arrives from beyond the horizon. Empires can fall suddenly. The city that seemed invincible can become a report delivered by a messenger. Isaiah then speaks concerning Edom and Arabia. Again we hear the language of watchmen, fugitives, caravans, and approaching disaster. These brief oracles contribute to one accumulating impression. No corner of the political world is truly stable. Everyone is watching someone. Everyone fears someone. Every kingdom is making calculations. Every trading route depends upon conditions that can change. Every city that boasts today may mourn tomorrow. And then Isaiah returns to Jerusalem. The city is called the Valley of Vision. The scene is strange. People are on rooftops. There is noise, confusion. A city under threat. Leaders flee. Defenses are inspected. Walls are strengthened. Water supplies are secured. Houses may be dismantled to reinforce fortifications. Every practical measure receives attention, except the one Isaiah considers most important. The people do not look to the one who made it. They prepare for the crisis without turning toward God. Again, the issue is not that practical preparation is inherently wrong. Jerusalem absolutely needed walls and water if an army approached. Isaiah's accusation is about the deeper posture. They can see the weapons. They can see the breaches in the wall. They can see the reservoirs. They can see the enemy. But they refuse to see the spiritual meaning of the hour. And instead of repentance, some respond with fatalistic celebration. Eat and drink because tomorrow we die. When a society loses hope, pleasure can become a form of surrender. If tomorrow cannot be trusted, consume today. If judgment cannot be avoided, celebrate while there is still wine. Isaiah hears something darker beneath the feast. The city has been warned, but warning has not produced humility. Then the prophet focuses on one official, Shebna. He occupies an important position over the royal household, yet Isaiah accuses him of self-exaltation. Shebna has prepared an impressive tomb for himself, a monument to status and permanence. But he will not control his own legacy. He will be removed. Another servant, Eliakim, will be raised into responsibility. Authority over the house of David will be placed upon his shoulder. Isaiah uses the image of a key. What he opens, no one shuts. What he shuts, no one opens. The point in its immediate context concerns delegated authority within the royal household. Even beneath kings, officials rise and fall. Positions that look secure are temporary. Prestige cannot protect the proud. Then Isaiah's vision expands again until the whole earth seems to tremble. Isaiah 24 begins a section sometimes called Isaiah's Apocalypse because its language moves beyond individual nations toward universal judgment. The earth is laid waste. Social distinctions collapse. Priest and people, master and servant, buyer and seller, debtor and creditor. No social position can purchase immunity. The land is described as polluted by its inhabitants. Covenant-breaking and human rebellion have consequences that seem to spread through creation itself. Wine fails, music ceases, celebration turns into mourning. Cities become desolate, the earth staggers, it reels like a drunkard. The language is larger than the fall of one kingdom. Isaiah is pushing the audience toward a question that will dominate the rest of Scripture. What happens when the problem is not merely Assyria or Babylon or corrupt kings? What happens when the problem is human rebellion itself? If one empire falls and another replaces it, has the world truly been healed? If Judah survives but remains unjust, has salvation really come? If exile ends but sin remains, Has restoration been completed? Isaiah's answer will eventually lead toward the servant and new creation. But not yet. First, judgment reaches a climax. The Lord is pictured reigning from Zion. Proud powers are humbled, and suddenly, in the middle of devastation, Isaiah sees a feast. A mountain, rich food, wine, nations gathered. The image is astonishing because it appears after scenes of worldwide ruin. God prepares a banquet for all peoples. And then Isaiah says something far greater than the defeat of any army. A covering lies over the nations, a shadow hangs over humanity. Death. And God will swallow up death forever. Tears will be wiped away. Disgrace will be removed. The people will say that this is the God they waited for. This is salvation. Isaiah has moved from military crisis to the deepest enemy of human existence. Assyria can be defeated. Another Assyria will eventually arise in some form. Babylon can fall. Another empire will take its place. A righteous king can improve a generation. Another generation can rebel. But what kind of salvation would be necessary to deal with death itself? Isaiah gives no complete explanation yet. He simply opens the horizon. Judgment is not the destination. Death itself does not possess the final word. Then Isaiah gives songs of confidence, a strong city, God as salvation, gates opened for a righteous nation, a call to trust in the Lord. Yet even these songs are surrounded by longing. The people wait. They experience discipline. They desire God's presence. And Isaiah speaks mysteriously of the dead living again. The language of resurrection begins to enter the prophetic imagination. Those who dwell in the dust are called to awake and sing. Hope is becoming larger than national recovery. The final chapter of this section, Isaiah 27, returns to images we have already encountered. A great enemy is defeated. Then the vineyard appears again, but this time the song has changed. Earlier, the vineyard produced rotten fruit and faced judgment. Now God speaks of watching over his vineyard, watering it, guarding it, protecting it. The failed vineyard is not simply abandoned forever. Restoration remains possible. Israel will take root. Jacob will blossom. Its fruit will fill the world. Exiles will be gathered. A great trumpet will sound. Those scattered in Assyria and Egypt will come and worship the Lord at Jerusalem. The movement is extraordinary. Isaiah began by condemning Judah. Then he confronted its king. Then his vision swept across empires. And now, the same nations that represented danger, exile, and political temptation appear inside a vision of gathering. Judgment has not disappeared, but it is not the final purpose. Isaiah has established something his audience must understand before the greatest historical crisis arrives. No empire is God. No alliance is salvation. No human throne is eternal. Babylon can fall. Assyria can be broken. Egypt can be shaken. Tyre can lose its wealth. Jerusalem itself can be judged. But above them all remains the king Isaiah saw in the temple. That truth is about to move from prophetic proclamation into terrifying history. The warnings concerning trust will soon be tested. Judah will look toward Egypt. Assyria will continue advancing. The northern kingdom will disappear beneath imperial conquest. Fortified cities will fall, one after another. And eventually, the army whose name had haunted Isaiah's prophecies will enter Judah itself. This time, there will be no distant oracle, no symbolic map, no theoretical question. Assyrian soldiers will stand in the land. An imperial spokesman will address Jerusalem from outside its walls. He will speak in a language ordinary people can understand. He will mock their king. He will ridicule their strategy. And then he will attack the belief at the center of everything Isaiah has proclaimed. He will ask whether Jerusalem's God is truly able to save. At that moment, Isaiah's theology will become a matter of survival, and Jerusalem will have nowhere left to hide. The warnings were no longer theoretical. Assyria was coming. For years, Isaiah had told Judah that the empire it feared, admired, resisted, and sometimes depended upon would become an instrument of judgment. Now the empire was moving through the region with terrifying efficiency. Cities fell, kings submitted, tribute flowed, populations were displaced, and the northern kingdom of Israel, once Judah's rival and brother nation, was approaching its end. Samaria had stood as the capital of Israel for generations. Its rulers had built palaces there. Its politics had survived coups, assassinations, wars, and prophetic confrontations. But Assyria did not merely defeat kingdoms, it reorganized them. It deported populations. It resettled conquered territories. It broke political identities that had existed for centuries. In 722 BC, Samaria fell. The northern kingdom ceased to exist as an independent state. For Judah, the message should have been impossible to ignore. Everything Isaiah had warned about imperial power was now visible just beyond Judah's borders. The question was no longer whether Assyria could destroy a kingdom. It had. The question was whether Judah would learn anything from watching it happen. Isaiah's answer in chapters 28 through 35 is severe. He begins again with Ephraim, the northern kingdom, describing its pride as a fading crown. Samaria's apparent beauty could not protect it. Its leaders had trusted in their own security. But the storm came, and what happened to the north now stands as a warning to the south. Judah's leaders are not automatically wiser. Isaiah accuses priests and prophets of staggering in confusion. The very people who should help the nation understand its covenant responsibilities have become incapable of guiding it faithfully. The prophet mocks those who refuse his message as though it were childish repetition. They do not want instruction. They want reassurance. They do not want to hear that their foundations are unstable. So Isaiah speaks of another foundation, a stone laid in Zion, a tested stone, a precious cornerstone, a sure foundation. The one who trusts will not be driven into panic. That image matters because panic is shaping Judah's politics. Assyria's advance forces leaders to search for something solid. They believe security can be negotiated. Isaiah says the true question is what foundation can survive judgment. Judah's rulers imagine that they have made what Isaiah describes sarcastically as a covenant with death. They believe disaster will pass them by. Perhaps they think diplomacy has created protection. Perhaps agreements with foreign powers will shield them. But Isaiah strips away the illusion. A refuge built on falsehood cannot withstand the storm. The overwhelming scourge will expose it. Political ingenuity can delay consequences. It cannot cancel reality. Then Isaiah turns toward Jerusalem under another name, Ariel. The meaning can carry associations with the city of David and the altar hearth. Jerusalem celebrates its festivals year after year. The religious calendar continues. But Isaiah announces that the city itself will be brought low. Enemies will surround it. Siege works will rise against it. The city, whose people assumed they possessed special security because the temple stood within its walls, will experience humiliation. Yet once again, judgment does not end the vision. The multitude of attacking nations will become like dust. Their apparent permanence will vanish. Isaiah keeps placing two truths side by side. Jerusalem can be judged. Jerusalem can also be delivered. The city is not protected because its inhabitants are automatically righteous, nor is it abandoned because judgment has arrived. The story depends upon the purpose of God, not upon simplistic slogans. But there is another problem. The people are spiritually asleep. Isaiah describes them as unable to read what is placed before them. One person says the scroll is sealed. Another says he cannot read. The problem is not the physical availability of revelation. It is resistance. Then comes one of Isaiah's sharpest critiques of religious hypocrisy. The people draw near with their mouths. They honor God with their lips, but their hearts are far away. Once again, Isaiah returns to the contradiction that opened the entire book. Worship remains. Words remain. Traditions remain. But the heart has moved elsewhere. This pattern explains why Judah can maintain religious identity while making decisions based almost entirely on fear. A people can sing about trust and still build policy on unbelief. A king can speak respectfully about God and still depend on horses and treaties. A nation can possess sacred language while functioning as though God were absent. Isaiah then announces that human wisdom will be overturned. Those who imagine they can hide their plans from God are compared to clay questioning the potter. The created thing acts as if the Creator cannot see, but the order will be reversed. The deaf will hear, the blind will see, the humble will rejoice, the ruthless will come to an end. Restoration will involve more than changing borders. It will involve seeing clearly again. Then Isaiah reaches the issue that has been gathering force for chapters. Egypt. Judah's leaders are sending representatives south. Diplomatic missions move toward a kingdom remembered throughout Israel's history for both power and oppression. The logic is easy to understand. Assyria is enormous. Judah is small. Egypt possesses resources, horses, chariots, wealth, and military prestige. If Judah can secure Egyptian support, perhaps Assyrian expansion can be resisted. Isaiah calls the strategy rebellion. Woe to the rebellious children, he declares. They make plans, but not God's plans. They form alliances, but not according to His Spirit. They go down to Egypt without consulting Him. The language is theological because the problem is theological. Judah is not merely selecting a foreign policy. It is choosing a refuge. Pharaoh's protection will become shame. Egypt's shadow will become disgrace. The envoys may carry treasure. Negotiators may cross dangerous territory. Diplomats may believe they are doing sophisticated statecraft. But Isaiah gives Egypt a humiliating nickname. Its help is useless. Its strength will not accomplish what Judah imagines. Then the prophet says something extraordinary about his own audience. Write it down. Put the warning on a tablet. Preserve it as a witness. Why? Because the people do not want truth. They tell the seers not to see. They tell the prophets not to speak what is right. They want pleasant words. They want illusions. They want the Holy One of Israel removed from their path. The problem is not ignorance. It is demand-driven deception. People are asking their spiritual leaders to tell them what they already want to hear. Isaiah refuses. He compares Judah's false confidence to a high wall with a crack spreading through it. For a while, the wall still stands. From a distance, it may look strong. Then suddenly it collapses. That is how false security works. The final failure can look sudden, even when the fracture has been growing for years. Yet in the same chapter, Isaiah speaks one of the clearest invitations to trust. In returning and rest is salvation. In quietness and trust is strength. But the people refuse. They prefer horses. Then Isaiah says they will discover that the enemy has faster horses. Every human answer generates another human problem. Judah wants speed. Assyria has greater speed. Judah wants military strength. Assyria has greater military strength. Judah wants political sophistication. Assyria has mastered imperial politics. If the contest is merely about who has the greater machinery of power, Judah has already lost. Isaiah is trying to move the argument to another level. What does trust look like when obedience seems politically dangerous? And can a small kingdom believe in God without using belief as an excuse for irresponsibility or presumption? This is not simple. Isaiah is not teaching passivity. He is exposing idolatrous dependence. The distinction matters. Judah can build defenses. It can prepare water systems. It can organize the city. But if those preparations become substitutes for faithfulness, then the walls have become another idol. Isaiah 31 repeats the warning. Woe to those who go down to Egypt for help. They rely on horses. They trust in chariots because there are many. They trust in horsemen because they are strong. But they do not look to the Holy One of Israel. Isaiah then draws the contrast with brutal simplicity. The Egyptians are human, not God. Their horses are flesh, not spirit. That sentence demolishes the mythology of military power. The horses are real. The soldiers are real. The chariots are real. But they are still created, limited, mortal realities. Judah's fear has enlarged them until they function almost like gods. Isaiah reduces them back to scale. Human, flesh, temporary. Then the book offers another vision of righteous kingship. A king will reign in righteousness. Princes will rule with justice. The eyes of those who see will no longer be closed. The ears of those who hear will listen. The fool will no longer be treated as noble simply because society has lost its moral categories. Justice will once again align with truth. It is another reminder that Isaiah's hope is never merely the disappearance of foreign armies. A nation is not restored simply because enemies go home. It must become righteous. The wilderness becomes fruitful. Justice dwells in the land. The result of righteousness as peace, quietness, and security. That is the opposite of Judah's current situation. Now fear dominates. Soon siege will dominate. Isaiah's vision says genuine peace must grow from something deeper than military equilibrium. Then chapter 33 brings the destroyer into focus. The Assyrian power that betrayed and devastated others will itself face betrayal and devastation. Jerusalem cries for mercy. The people wait. The Lord is described as exalted. Zion will be filled with justice and righteousness. In the midst of crisis comes a line that defines real security. The fear of the Lord is Zion's treasure. Not Assyrian favor, not Egyptian cavalry, not walls, not wealth, not diplomacy. The fear of the Lord. But before Judah reaches that realization, the crisis must become unbearable. The historical narrative now takes center stage. Isaiah 36 begins with a date, the 14th year of King Hezekiah. Assyria is ruled by Sennacherib. Hezekiah is very different from Ahaz. Where Ahaz repeatedly embraced policies Isaiah condemned, Hezekiah is remembered as a king who trusted the Lord and carried out major religious reforms. But faithful kings do not live outside history. Hezekiah inherits a dangerous geopolitical world. Sennacherib has campaigned through the region. Judah has rebelled against Assyrian domination. The consequences are enormous. The biblical text says that Sennacherib attacked the fortified cities of Judah and captured them. This must not be rushed past. Jerusalem has not yet fallen. But Judah is being dismantled around it. One fortified city after another disappears. Villages are exposed. Fields become battle zones. Refugees move toward whatever safety remains. The capital survives while the kingdom surrounding it bleeds. Outside the biblical text, Assyrian records boast of Sennacherib's campaign and present Hezekiah as trapped in Jerusalem. The Assyrians, unsurprisingly, interpret events from the perspective of imperial victory. The biblical account focuses on what happened when the imperial threat reached Jerusalem and challenged the city's trust in God. Sennacherib sends a powerful delegation from Lachish toward Jerusalem. Among them is an official commonly called the Rabshakeh, a title rather than a personal name. And where does he stand? Near the conduit of the upper pool. The location should sound familiar. Years earlier, Isaiah met Ahaz near a water system when Judah faced another military crisis. Now another king stands within the legacy of the same question. Ahaz faced fear and chose Assyria. Hezekiah is now facing Assyria itself. History has returned to the same test. The Rabshakeh calls for the king. Representatives from Hezekiah's government come out to meet him. The Assyrian official begins to speak. His weapon is not a sword, not yet. It is rhetoric. He asks the question at the center of the crisis. What confidence is this in which you trust? It is almost as though Assyria has learned Isaiah's vocabulary. Trust, confidence, refuge. These have been Isaiah's themes for years. Now the enemy uses the same question. The Rabshakeh dismantles Judah's possible sources of confidence one by one. Do you trust Egypt? Egypt is like a broken reed. Lean on it, and it pierces your hand. Isaiah would have agreed. Do you trust your own military strength? Assyria can give you 2,000 horses if you can find enough riders. The insult is devastating. Judah is being told that its military resources are insignificant. Then the Assyrian spokesman turns toward religion. Perhaps he says, "You trust the Lord your God." But has Hezekiah not removed many high places and altars? From the perspective of Assyrian intelligence, Hezekiah's reforms can be misinterpreted as an attack on the very God Judah claims to trust. The Assyrian does not understand covenant worship. He sees religious sites removed and assumes fewer altars must mean less divine support. Then he makes an even more disturbing claim. Did the Lord not tell Assyria to march against this land? This is psychological warfare at its most sophisticated. Isaiah has indeed proclaimed that Assyria can be used as an instrument of judgment. Now Assyria takes that truth and weaponizes it. If God has used Assyria, perhaps resistance is pointless. Perhaps the empire's success proves that it speaks for God. This is where Isaiah's earlier teaching becomes essential. An empire can be used by God without becoming God. An instrument can fulfill a purpose and still be judged for pride. Success does not prove righteousness. The axe is still only an axe. But the people standing on Jerusalem's wall do not hear a theological lecture. They hear the representative of the most frightening military machine in their world. Hezekiah's officials ask the Rabshakeh to speak in Aramaic, the language of diplomacy, rather than Hebrew. They do not want ordinary people on the wall to understand. The Rabshakeh refuses. He wants the population to hear. Fear works best when it spreads. So he raises his voice in Hebrew. Do not let Hezekiah deceive you. Do not let him make you trust in the Lord. Make peace with Assyria. Surrender. Then you can enjoy your own vine and fig tree until you are taken to another land. The language of exile is made to sound gentle. Do not resist. Submit. You will live. Every empire tries to give domination a respectable vocabulary. Then comes the theological assault. Have the gods of any nation delivered their lands from the king of Assyria? Where are the gods of Hamath? Where are the gods of Arpad? Where are the gods of Sepharvaim? Did any god rescue Samaria? Why should Jerusalem be different? From the standpoint of Assyrian imperial theology, the argument is simple. Assyria has conquered nation after nation. Each nation had gods. Their cities fell. Therefore, Assyria's power, and by implication Assyria's gods, must be superior. Jerusalem is merely the next city in line. This is no longer a political dispute. The Rabshakeh has turned the siege into a challenge against the identity of Israel's God, and the people on the wall say nothing. Hezekiah had commanded them not to answer. Silence hangs over Jerusalem. The officials return to the king with torn clothes. Hezekiah tears his own garments. He covers himself with sackcloth. And then he does what Ahaz repeatedly refused to do. He goes to the house of the Lord. The king who is surrounded finally turns toward the throne Isaiah had seen decades earlier. He sends messengers to Isaiah. This is a day of distress, rebuke, and disgrace. The kingdom has reached the limit of its own strength. Isaiah answers with a message that sounds almost impossible. Do not be afraid of the words you have heard. Sennacherib will not have the final word. The crisis shifts. The Assyrian army has other matters to address. But Sennacherib sends another message to Hezekiah. Do not let your God deceive you. Jerusalem will fall. Look at history. Look at the cities Assyria has destroyed. Look at the kings who could not stop us. The letter reaches Hezekiah, and Hezekiah takes it into the temple. He spreads it before the Lord. The gesture is one of the most powerful images in this entire section. The problem is written down. The threats are real. The military facts are not denied. Hezekiah does not pretend Sennacherib is weak. He does not deny that other nations have fallen. He simply places the crisis before God. Then he prays. He acknowledges the God of Israel as enthroned above the cherubim. There is the throne again. Isaiah saw it. Now Hezekiah appeals to it. You alone are God over all the kingdoms of the earth. You made heaven and earth. Listen to Sennacherib's words. It is true, Hezekiah admits, that the Assyrian kings devastated nations and destroyed their gods. But those gods were not gods. They were human creations, wood, stone, objects made by hands. Now, Lord, save us. And notice the purpose Hezekiah gives, not merely so Judah can survive, so that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you alone are the Lord. The crisis has become a contest between two visions of reality. Sennacherib sees history as a list of conquered cities proving Assyria's supremacy. Hezekiah sees one creator standing above every kingdom. Isaiah sends the answer. God has heard. Then comes a long prophetic response against Sennacherib. The king of Assyria has mocked and blasphemed, against whom? The Holy One of Israel. Again Isaiah returns to holiness. Sennacherib boasts of his chariots, his conquests, his ability to reach the heights. His armies have cut down forests and seized fortified places. But Isaiah declares that Assyria's victories did not place the empire outside divine sovereignty. The ruler who believes he designed history discovers that he is still a creature within it. Then the prophecy turns toward Jerusalem. Sennacherib will not enter the city. He will not shoot an arrow there. He will not build the siege ramp that would mark Jerusalem's final destruction. He will return the way he came. The city will be defended. And then the biblical narrative reports catastrophe in the Assyrian camp. A vast number of Assyrian soldiers die. The text attributes the event to the angel of the Lord. By morning the camp is filled with bodies. Sennacherib withdraws. He returns to Nineveh. Jerusalem survives. The city that seems certain to join the list of Assyria's trophies is still standing. The walls remain. The temple remains. Hezekiah remains king. The imperial spokesman had asked whether Judah's God could deliver. Jerusalem now has its answer. But this victory must be understood carefully. Judah itself had already suffered terribly. Fortified cities had fallen. The countryside had been devastated. The deliverance of Jerusalem did not erase the pain of the campaign, nor did it mean Judah had become permanently secure. The danger of reading miraculous deliverance incorrectly is that one can turn a moment of mercy into a guarantee that no future judgment can ever come. Isaiah will not allow that conclusion. the story immediately becomes personal. Hezekiah becomes desperately ill. Isaiah comes to him with a message, "Set your house in order, you will die." Hezekiah turns his face toward the wall and prays. He weeps bitterly. Before Isaiah has even fully departed, the word comes that the king's prayer has been heard. Years are added to his life. A sign involving the shadow is given. The king recovers. Hezekiah's own song reflects on the terror of approaching death and the gratitude of restoration. The king who watched his city come close to death has now experienced his own body come close to death. Again deliverance comes. Again survival feels like the final word. But it is not, because visitors arrive in Jerusalem. They come from Babylon. At this stage, Babylon is not yet the empire that will destroy Judah. But it is significant enough to send representatives after hearing of Hezekiah's illness and recovery. Hezekiah receives them, and then he shows them everything: silver, gold, spices, precious oil, weapons, treasuries. Nothing in his palace or kingdom is withheld from their view. Isaiah comes to the king. What did these men say? Where did they come from, Babylon? Hezekiah answers, what did they see? Everything. Then Isaiah delivers a prophecy that changes the direction of the book. Days are coming when everything in the palace will be carried away to Babylon. Nothing will be left. Some of Hezekiah's own descendants will be taken away and serve in the palace of the king of Babylon. Assyria had surrounded Jerusalem and failed to take it, yet another empire will come, and that empire will succeed. The moment is devastating because it destroys any easy interpretation of the Assyrian deliverance. Jerusalem was saved, but Jerusalem is not untouchable. Hezekiah trusted God during the Assyrian crisis. But one faithful episode does not erase the deeper condition Isaiah has been exposing since chapter 1. The Vineyard's problem remains. Human pride remains. Injustice remains. The nation remains vulnerable to covenant judgment. And now Babylon stands in the future. A city that has already appeared symbolically in Isaiah's oracles will become the name associated with Judah's exile. The treasures Hezekiah proudly displayed will disappear. The royal line will experience humiliation. The city that Assyria could not take will one day fall to another empire. The crisis of Isaiah has just become much larger. Until now, the central question seemed to be, will Jerusalem survive Assyria? It did. Now the question becomes, what happens when Jerusalem does not survive? What happens to the promises when the temple is destroyed? What happens to the people when the land is lost? What happens to the Davidic hope when descendants of David are carried away? What happens to Israel's identity when Babylon becomes home? And what kind of salvation could possibly bring a people back from that? Isaiah 39 closes with the shadow of exile. Then the next movement of the book begins with one word that sounds almost impossible after everything we have heard. Not judgment, not invasion, not accusation. Comfort. Comfort, comfort my people. The city that has been warned of destruction is now spoken to as though the years of punishment have passed. A road is about to open through the wilderness. A voice will cry out. Mountains will be lowered, valleys will rise, and the glory of the Lord will be revealed. Assyria had been the crisis of Hezekiah's generation. Babylon will become the crisis of another. But beyond Babylon, Isaiah sees something no empire will be able to prevent. A return, a new exodus, and a God who is coming to lead his people home. Comfort, comfort my people. After 39 chapters filled with rebellion, warning political crisis, Assyrian invasion, and the shadow of Babylon, the change is immediate. The voice is different. The horizon is different. Even the audience seems to be standing in a different place. Isaiah has just told Hezekiah that a day will come when Jerusalem's treasures will be carried to Babylon, and members of the royal family will be taken away. Now Isaiah speaks beyond that catastrophe. He addresses people who know what exile feels like, people for whom Jerusalem is no longer simply a threatened city, but a wounded memory. People who have watched the symbols of national security collapse. The land has been lost. The monarchy has been humiliated. The temple will no longer appear to guarantee safety. Babylon will seem stronger than everything Judah once believed could protect it. And into that future darkness comes a command, "Comfort my people. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem. Tell her that her period of hard service has been completed." The book of Isaiah has not suddenly forgotten judgment. It has carried judgment to its terrible conclusion. Now the question changes. What does God do after judgment, and can a covenant people whose world has collapsed ever begin again? A voice cries out, "Prepare the way of the Lord in the wilderness. Make straight a highway for our God." Valleys will be raised, mountains and hills will be lowered, rough ground will become level, and the glory of the Lord will be revealed. The imagery recalls an older story. Once before, Israel had been trapped beneath a great power. Once before, its people had lived under domination. Once before, God had led them out. Egypt, the Exodus, the wilderness, the journey toward the land. Now Isaiah deliberately uses language that sounds like another Exodus. But this time the journey is not out of Egypt, it is out of Babylon. The desert that once separated Israel from the promised land becomes a highway home. The message is not merely that political circumstances will improve. God himself is pictured as coming to lead his people. The exile that seemed to mark the end of Israel's story is being transformed into the setting of a new beginning. But there is a problem. How can exiles believe this Babylon looks permanent? Jerusalem looks ruined. Human life itself appears fragile. So another voice declares that all flesh is like grass. Its beauty is like a flower of the field. Grass withers, flowers fall. Generations disappear, kings disappear, empires disappear. But the word of God stands forever. This is the foundation of Isaiah's comfort. Not optimism, not denial. Not the promise that powerful nations will suddenly become kind. The reason hope can survive is that Babylon is temporary, while the word of God is not. Then Jerusalem is told to become a herald. Go up on a high mountain, lift your voice, do not be afraid. Say to the cities of Judah, here is your God. The image that follows combines power and tenderness. God comes with strength, yet he also tends his flock like a shepherd. He gathers lambs in his arms, he carries them close. The same God whose holiness shook the temple in Isaiah 6 is now pictured carrying the vulnerable. Isaiah refuses to divide divine holiness from divine compassion. The God who judges rebellion is also the God who restores the broken. Then the prophet asks a series of enormous questions. Who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand? Who has marked off the heavens? Who has weighed mountains? Who taught the Spirit of the Lord? Who served as his counselor? The questions are aimed at despair. Exiles may look at Babylon and conclude that Babylon is large and they are small. Isaiah changes the scale. Compared with God, nations are like a drop from a bucket. They are like dust on the scales. Lebanon does not contain enough wood for an offering equal to his greatness. The heavens are stretched out like a curtain. Earthly rulers rise and disappear. The one who created the stars calls them forth. None is missing. Then Isaiah turns directly toward Israel's complaint. Why do you say that your way is hidden from the Lord? Why assume that your cause has been forgotten? Exile can make abandonment feel like fact. If Jerusalem fell, perhaps God no longer sees. If Babylon won, perhaps Babylon's gods won. If generations pass without restoration, perhaps the promises expired. Isaiah rejects that conclusion. The Lord does not grow tired. His understanding cannot be measured. He gives strength to the weary. Even young people become exhausted. Even the strong stumble. But those who wait for the Lord renew their strength. They rise on wings like eagles. They run without collapsing. They walk without fainting. These words are often removed from their historical setting and applied only to personal encouragement. They certainly speak to weary individuals. But their first power inside Isaiah is larger. They are addressed to a weary people, a nation whose political strength has failed, a community whose confidence has been shattered. The promise is not that Israel will discover hidden strength within itself. It is that God has not become exhausted simply because Israel has. Then Isaiah introduces a figure whose appearance will reshape the political world. Someone is being stirred up from the east. Kings will fall before him. Nations will be handed over. He advances rapidly. At first the figure is not named, but the direction of the argument is clear. History is moving again. Babylon will not last forever. Israel is told not to fear. Why? Because God has not rejected his servant Jacob. I am with you. The phrase reaches back toward Immanuel, God with us. The people may feel abandoned, but the covenant story has not disappeared. Do not fear. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you. The language does not promise that Israel has never suffered. It comes precisely because Israel has suffered. Comfort is meaningful because devastation has been real. Isaiah then pictures the impossible changing form. Desert becomes fertile. Water appears in dry places. Trees grow where barrenness dominated. The transformation is not simply decorative imagery. The wilderness has become a theological landscape. The road home requires passing through spaces that seem incapable of sustaining life. God provides what the journey requires. The new Exodus is not powered by the exile's resources. The one who makes the road also sustains those traveling on it. Then Isaiah stages what almost sounds like a courtroom contest. The nations and their gods are challenged. Can the idols explain history? Can they announce what is coming? Can they act? Can they save? Show us what you can do. Tell us the future. Demonstrate that you are truly gods. The challenge receives no meaningful answer. The idols are described as nothing. Their works amount to nothing. The contrast between Israel's God and the idols becomes one of the dominant themes of these chapters. This is not merely abstract theology. Exile creates a crisis of worship. Babylon is filled with religious imagery. Its temples, rituals, statues, and imperial victories communicate a message. Our gods are powerful. Your city fell. Your temple was defeated. Your people were deported. Therefore, your God must be weak. Isaiah attacks that entire interpretation. An idol may be covered with precious metal. A craftsman may shape it beautifully. Another worker may construct a base so it does not fall over, but it remains something human hands had to make. The satire becomes sharp. A man cuts wood. Part of it warms him, part of it cooks his food, and from the remaining piece he makes a god and bows down before it. The problem Isaiah insists is not merely the object. It is the blindness that allows a person to worship what he has produced. The same material that becomes fuel can become sacred when imagination assigns it divine power. Isaiah's critique reaches beyond ancient statues. It exposes the human tendency to create sources of ultimate trust out of things that are themselves created. Political systems, wealth, weapons, kings, empires, objects, anything can become spiritually distorted when people ask it to provide the security, identity, or salvation that only God can provide. Israel had repeatedly fallen into that pattern, and exile did not automatically cure it. The people being called home still need to remember who God is. That is why Isaiah repeatedly says, "Remember, listen, do not fear. I formed you, you are my servant. You will not be forgotten." God describes Israel's sins as something he can wipe away. Return to me. The invitation reaches beneath geography. Returning to Jerusalem is one thing. Returning to God is another. The entire second half of Isaiah will refuse to confuse the two. A person can leave Babylon physically while carrying Babylon in the heart. A nation can rebuild walls while remaining spiritually broken. The deepest restoration must involve more than relocation. But first, the political door must open. And now Isaiah finally names the ruler who will make that possible: Cyrus. The name is one of the most remarkable features of these chapters. Cyrus the Great of Persia would conquer Babylon in 539 BC, long after the immediate Assyrian crisis of Isaiah's 8th century ministry. Under Persian rule, exiled populations, including the Judeans, would be permitted to return and rebuild aspects of their communal and religious life. Isaiah presents Cyrus as an instrument in God's purpose. The language is startling. God calls him my shepherd. Then in Isaiah 45, Cyrus is called God's anointed. The Hebrew term behind anointed is the word from which the concept of Messiah comes. That does not mean Cyrus is presented as Israel's ultimate messianic king. He is a Persian ruler. He does not belong to David's dynasty. The point is that God can commission even a foreign king for a particular historical purpose. Cyrus will open the way for restoration. God promises to go before him. Gates will be opened. Powerful rulers will be brought low. Treasures hidden in darkness will come into his reach. And Cyrus is told, in effect, that all of this serves a purpose larger than his own ambition. For the sake of Jacob. For the sake of Israel. Isaiah's theology of empire has now come full circle. Assyria was used without becoming righteous. Babylon could rise without becoming eternal. And Persia can become an instrument of liberation without becoming Israel's God. No empire owns history. Different rulers enter the stage. Each possesses genuine agency. Each has political ambitions, yet none becomes ultimate. The Lord remains the one Isaiah saw upon the throne. This produces a difficult question. Why would God use a foreign king? Why not restore Israel through a ruler from David's line immediately? Why should the return from Babylon begin through Persian policy? Isaiah anticipates resistance. The clay does not command the potter. A created thing cannot insist that God act only through methods people find appropriate. Cyrus does not need to fit Israel's expectations in order to serve the purpose assigned to him. The Creator is free to use rulers who do not understand the full significance of what they are doing. This is one of the great lessons of Isaiah's historical vision. God's sovereignty is larger than the religious boundaries human beings expect him to respect. He can judge his own people through a foreign empire. He can judge that empire through another. He can use a pagan ruler to release exiles. And he can accomplish all of this without endorsing everything those empires represent. Then Isaiah makes one of the most exclusive theological declarations in the book. There is no other God. The Lord forms light and creates darkness. He brings well-being and calamity in the sense of historical judgment. He is not one regional deity competing within Babylon's religious marketplace. He is Creator. Let the heavens rain down righteousness. Let salvation spring from the earth. Isaiah's argument moves relentlessly toward universal sovereignty. If Israel's God is truly Creator, then exile cannot mean he lost territorial control. He does not cease being God east of Jerusalem. He does not become powerless in Babylon. The land matters. Jerusalem matters. The temple matters, but God is not confined to them. That truth is essential for an exiled people. Then the gods of Babylon themselves appear. Bel bows down, Nebo stoops. Their idols must be loaded onto animals. The supposed gods become luggage. They cannot carry the people. The people must carry them. Isaiah contrasts them with Israel's God. From Israel's beginning, God says, I have carried you. Even to old age I am He. I made you. I will bear you. I will carry you. I will save you. The contrast is almost cinematic. Babylonian refugees might one day place heavy idols on beasts while fleeing a collapsing city. The gods must be rescued from their own temples. Israel's God says He is the one who carries His people. That reversal lies at the heart of biblical worship. A false god requires people to sustain it. The living God sustains His people. Then Babylon herself is addressed. Come down, sit in the dust. The Queen of Kingdoms will lose her throne. She had believed her power would continue forever. She had shown no mercy. She had said in her heart, I am, and there is no one besides me. Those words echo divine claims in a distorted human form. Babylon has taken the language of ultimacy for itself. She imagines she is incomparable, secure, untouchable. No widowhood, no loss, no collapse. Isaiah says disaster will come suddenly. Her sorceries will not save her. Her accumulated knowledge will not rescue her. Her advisors will fail. The astrologers who study the heavens cannot prevent the political world beneath those heavens from collapsing. Babylon, like every empire before it, has mistaken duration for immortality. The city was powerful. That did not make it eternal. Its confidence was enormous. That did not make it true. And for the exiles, Babylon's fall means something astonishing. The prison door can open. But Isaiah does not let Israel celebrate as though Babylon is the only guilty party. Immediately the focus turns back to Jacob. Israel itself is stubborn. Its neck is compared to iron, its forehead to bronze. God had announced events ahead of time because Israel had a habit of attributing outcomes to idols. The people can be released from Babylon and still resist God. This becomes the deeper problem of Isaiah 48. God acts for the sake of His name. He refines His people, but the refining has not made them innocent. The exile exposed false confidence. It did not automatically create obedience. Then comes a heartbreaking sentence. If only you had paid attention to my commands. Your peace would have been like a river, your righteousness like the waves of the sea. The tragedy of Judah is not that God never showed another way. Isaiah had warned them, prophets had spoken. The covenant had defined justice and faithfulness. Yet the nation repeatedly chose another path. Now, after all the consequences, the invitation to leave Babylon is accompanied by another command. Listen, the journey home cannot simply repeat the old rebellion. Then the announcement finally comes. Leave Babylon, flee from the Chaldeans, declare it with a shout. Send the message to the ends of the earth. The Lord has redeemed His servant Jacob. Again, Exodus imagery follows. When God led His people through the deserts, they did not thirst. Water came from the rock. The old story becomes the pattern for the new. Egypt had not been the end. Babylon will not be the end. A road is opening. A people can return. If this journey through Isaiah is helping you see how judgment, exile, and restoration fit together as one continuous story, save this documentary so you can return to the timeline later and continue with us as Isaiah's greatest mystery begins to come into focus. Because the end of Isaiah 48 introduces a tension that cannot be ignored. There is no peace for the wicked. The exiles can leave Babylon. But wickedness cannot simply be left behind like an abandoned house. Cyrus can defeat Babylon, He cannot defeat Israel's sin. Persian policy can reopen the road to Jerusalem. It cannot cleanse the human heart. A decree can rebuild a city. It cannot create perfect righteousness. The new Exodus has solved one enormous problem, captivity. But another problem remains. The same people who went into exile because of covenant rebellion are now being called out of exile. What will prevent history from repeating itself? The answer will not be Cyrus. His role is real but limited. Another figure must now move toward the center of Isaiah's vision, a servant. At times, Isaiah has already called Israel God's servant. Jacob was chosen. Israel was formed to bear witness. But Israel itself has been blind. Israel itself has needed rescue. How can the servant who needs salvation become the servant through whom salvation reaches the world? The next chapters will deepen that mystery. A servant will be called from the womb. His mission will reach Israel. But Israel alone will not be enough. He will become a light to the nations. He will confront rejection. He will obey where others have failed. And eventually Isaiah will describe him in a way that has generated some of the most profound questions in the entire Bible. A servant exalted, a servant disfigured, a servant rejected, a servant carrying what belongs to others. Cyrus can open Babylon's gates, but Isaiah is about to ask whether liberation must go deeper than Babylon. What if the greatest exile is not merely being far from Jerusalem? What if the deepest captivity is the condition that caused exile in the first place? The road home is open. Now Isaiah must reveal who can lead the people farther than Cyrus ever could. Cyrus could open the gates of Babylon. He could defeat an empire. He could authorize exiles to return. But he could not solve the problem that had sent Judah into exile in the first place. That problem was deeper than geography, deeper than politics, deeper than Babylon. Israel could leave captivity and still carry rebellion home. Jerusalem could be rebuilt while injustice survived. A temple could stand again while hearts remained distant from God. If restoration meant only returning to the land, then Isaiah's vision would remain incomplete. Something more was required. And now in Isaiah 49, another voice speaks. Listen to me, you islands. Hear this, you distant nations. The audience immediately expands beyond Israel. The speaker says that the Lord called him before his birth. His mouth has been made like a sharpened sword. He has been hidden like a polished arrow. Then comes the identification, you are my servant Israel, in whom I will display my splendor. At first the answer appears straightforward. The servant is Israel. That fits language Isaiah has already used. Throughout the previous chapters, Jacob and Israel have repeatedly been called God's servant. Israel was chosen. Israel was formed. Israel was meant to bear witness to the nations. But almost immediately, the language becomes more complicated. The servant is given a mission to bring Jacob back to God. He is called to gather Israel. How can the servant be Israel and yet also have a mission to restore Israel? Isaiah does not pause to provide a technical explanation. Instead, the identity of the servant develops through the poems themselves. At some moments, the servant clearly represents Israel. At others, the servant appears to embody Israel's calling in a way the nation has failed to do. The servant can stand with Israel and yet also stand before Israel. He can represent the people while carrying out a mission on their behalf. This is one reason these passages have generated such extensive interpretation. We should not erase their complexity. But one thing is already clear. The servant's mission reaches beyond national survival. God says that restoring the tribes of Jacob alone is too small a task. The servant will become a light to the nations. Salvation will reach to the ends of the earth. Isaiah has spoken of this global horizon before. The nations streaming toward Zion, Egypt and Assyria sharing in blessing. A Davidic ruler connected with international hope. Now the servant enters that same worldwide vision. Israel's restoration is not the end of the story. It becomes part of something larger, but the servant's path to that mission does not look like the path of Cyrus. Cyrus advances through military conquest. Kings fall before him, gates open. The servant moves through rejection. He is despised, abhorred by the nation, a servant of rulers. Yet kings will eventually rise in recognition. Princes will bow. The pattern is beginning to emerge. Humiliation first, vindication later. The servant will not look powerful according to the usual measurements of empire, yet his mission reaches farther than imperial armies ever could. Isaiah then turns toward Zion. Jerusalem speaks as though abandoned. The Lord has forsaken me. My Lord has forgotten me. The complaint makes sense after exile. A ruined city does not naturally feel remembered. Empty streets do not look like covenant faithfulness. Broken walls do not resemble divine favor. But God answers with one of Isaiah's most intimate images. Can a mother forget the child she nurses? Even if that were possible, God says, I will not forget you. Zion is pictured as engraved upon his hands. Her ruined walls are before him. Children will return. The city that seemed emptied will become crowded. Zion will look around in astonishment and ask where all these children came from. Restoration will be so great that the city, once defined by loss, will struggle to contain the returning population, and the nations themselves become involved. Kings and queens participate in the return. Those who once held power over Israel are no longer the final authorities over Israel's future. Again the question appears, can captives really be taken from a warrior? Can prisoners escape a tyrant? Isaiah's answer is yes. God will contend with those who contend with his people. The exile is not permanent. But the next chapter makes clear that Israel cannot blame every part of its condition on Babylon. Where is the certificate of divorce to which creditor was Israel sold? The point is not that judgment was imaginary. The point is that God has not been defeated by circumstances beyond his control. Israel's sins brought separation. When God called, no one answered. When he spoke, people did not listen. The old problem remains. The servant, however, is described differently. In Isaiah 50, another servant passage begins, The Lord has given him the tongue of one who is taught, so that he can sustain the weary with a word. Morning by morning he listens. God opens his ear, and the servant does not rebel. That sentence is easy to miss. But against the entire background of Isaiah, it is enormous. Israel was repeatedly described as rebellious. The people heard, but did not obey. Kings were warned, but chose their own strategies. Prophets spoke and were rejected. Now the servant says, I was not rebellious. He listens. And obedience leads directly into suffering. He offers his back to those who strike him, his cheeks to those who pull out the beard. He does not hide his face from mocking and spitting. This is not the triumph Judah might have expected. The obedient servant suffers, yet he remains confident that God will vindicate him. He sets his face like flint. He knows that shame will not have the final word. Again the pattern appears. Obedience, rejection, suffering, vindication. Isaiah then addresses those who walk in darkness. Trust in the name of the Lord. Depend upon God. But those who light their own fires and attempt to walk by self-made illumination discover that artificial light cannot ultimately rescue them. The theme reaches back across the entire book. Ahaz manufactured security through Assyria. Judah looked toward Egypt. Babylon trusted its wisdom. Human beings repeatedly build their own light when darkness becomes frightening. Isaiah keeps calling them toward another source. Then chapter 51 turns backward before moving forward. Look to Abraham. Look to Sarah. Israel's story once seemed impossible. Abraham was one man. Sarah was barren. Yet a people came from them. If God created a nation from what looked like impossibility, exile does not make restoration impossible. Zion's wilderness will become like Eden. Joy and gladness will replace devastation. The reference to Eden is important. Isaiah's horizon is expanding again. Restoration begins to resemble not merely the repair of a city, but the reversal of humanity's ancient loss. God's righteousness will endure. His salvation will extend through generations. The heavens themselves may vanish like smoke. The earth may wear out like a garment. But divine salvation will remain. The temporary and the eternal are being separated. Empires looked permanent. They fell. The earth itself appears stable. Isaiah imagines even creation changing. What then can truly endure God's righteousness? God's salvation, God's purpose. Zion is told to awaken. Jerusalem had drunk the cup of judgment. She had staggered beneath disaster. Her children had fallen. No one seemed able to guide her. But the cup will not remain in her hand forever. The oppressor will not define the end of her story. Then comes another command. Awake, awake. Put on strength, Zion. Put on beautiful garments, Jerusalem. The city is called to rise from the dust. The captive daughter is told to loosen the chains from her neck. Israel had been sold for nothing. Now redemption will not be accomplished because Israel suddenly discovers enough wealth to purchase freedom. God himself acts. Then Isaiah reaches words that the New Testament will later use in announcing the gospel. How beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of the messenger who brings good news. Peace, good news, salvation, your God reigns. That final announcement is the center. Babylon may have ruled politically, Persia may soon rule politically, but Zion's hope is not ultimately that one empire will replace another. Your God reigns. Watchmen lift their voices. The ruins of Jerusalem are told to break into singing. The Lord has comforted his people. All the ends of the earth will see his salvation. Then another Exodus command appears. Depart, leave, touch no unclean thing. Come out. But unlike the Exodus from Egypt, the people are not told to flee in panic. God will go before them. God will also be their rear guard. The new Exodus is secure because its true leader is not Cyrus. Cyrus creates political opportunity. God leads the return. And immediately after this announcement, Isaiah introduces the servant again. This time, the description becomes more mysterious, more disturbing, and more significant than anything that has come before. My servant will act wisely. He will be raised, lifted up, highly exalted. Those words sound like triumph, but the next image looks like catastrophe. Many are appalled at him. His appearance is disfigured. His form is marred. The servant who will be exalted first becomes an object of horror. Kings will eventually be silenced because of him, something they had not been told they will see, something they had not understood they will consider. Then Isaiah 53 begins with disbelief. Who has believed the message? The servant grows up like a tender shoot, like a root from dry ground. Again, Isaiah uses the language of unexpected life emerging from apparent barrenness. But this servant possesses none of the obvious splendor that would naturally attract admiration. No majestic appearance draws people toward him. Instead, he is despised and rejected, a man of suffering, acquainted with grief. People turn their faces away. He is treated as insignificant. Then the poem makes a startling interpretive move. The observers realize they misunderstood his suffering. They had assumed he was simply suffering because God had struck him, but now they say that he carried something belonging to them. Our griefs, our sorrows, our transgressions, our iniquities. The language becomes representative and substitutionary. The servant suffers in relation to the wrongdoing of others. The punishment connected with their peace falls upon him. His wounds become associated with their healing. Isaiah compares humanity to sheep. All have gone astray. Each has turned to his own way. The imagery reaches back toward the rebellion that has driven the entire book. Judah wandered. Kings wandered. Israel wandered. Human beings choose their own way. But the consequences converge upon the servant. He is oppressed, afflicted. Yet he does not respond with the expected retaliation. Like a lamb led to slaughter, he remains silent. He is taken away through oppression and judgment. His life is cut off from the land of the living. He is associated with a grave. At this point, the servant appears defeated. If the poem stopped there, the movement from humiliation to vindication would remain unfinished. But it does not stop. The servant will see the result of his suffering. The righteous servant will justify many. He will bear their iniquities. He will receive a portion among the great. The one who was despised is vindicated. The one treated as guilty is called righteous. The one apparently crushed becomes the means through which many benefit. And the one who dies is somehow spoken of beyond that death, seeing the fruit of what he has accomplished. For centuries, readers have asked, who is this servant within Isaiah? Itself, the servant language has connections with Israel that cannot simply be ignored. Israel was called God's servant repeatedly. Yet Isaiah 49-53 also portrays a servant who performs a mission toward Israel, obeys where Israel has been rebellious, suffers on behalf of others, and is finally vindicated. Jewish interpretation has included readings that identify the servant corporately with Israel, as well as other approaches within the long history of interpretation. Christian interpretation sees these passages reaching their fulfillment in Jesus. And the reason is not simply that later Christians noticed superficial similarities. The New Testament itself repeatedly returns to Isaiah's servant texts. The Gospel writers use Isaiah's language when explaining Jesus' ministry and rejection. Acts records Isaiah 53 being interpreted in relation to Jesus. 1 Peter echoes the servant's suffering when describing Christ bearing sins. The New Testament does not merely borrow Isaiah's vocabulary, it places the death and vindication of Jesus inside the pattern Isaiah has established. For this documentary, the distinction matters. Within Isaiah, we must first hear the servant against the story of Israel, exile, obedience, restoration, and the nations. Then we can see why the earliest Christians found in Jesus what they believed was the fullest realization of this servant mission. Isaiah's point, however, is already profound, even before we move into the New Testament. The deepest restoration will come through something radically different from ordinary imperial power. Assyria conquered through violence. Babylon ruled through domination. Cyrus liberates through political conquest. The servant brings healing through suffering. That is the reversal. The world expects the powerful to defeat the weak. Isaiah shows the apparently crushed servant becoming the agent of salvation. The world expects glory to prevent suffering. Isaiah places exaltation on the far side of suffering. The world assumes guilt belongs only to the guilty individual. Isaiah describes the righteous servant bearing the iniquity of many. The story has moved beyond a return from Babylon. Now it is addressing reconciliation. Isaiah 54 shows the consequences through images of restored relationship. A barren woman is told to sing because her children will become numerous. A tent must be enlarged, curtains stretched wider. The abandoned woman is called back. The city once overwhelmed by shame is promised restoration. For a brief moment, Isaiah says, it seemed as though God had hidden his face. But everlasting compassion now defines the future. The comparison reaches back to Noah. Just as the waters of Noah would not again become a flood, destroying all life, Isaiah speaks of a covenant of peace that will not be removed. Jerusalem is pictured as rebuilt with precious stones, but the beauty of the city is not the greatest promise. Its children will be taught by the Lord. Great will be their peace. Righteousness becomes the foundation. Oppression no longer defines the city. The restoration Isaiah imagined in the earliest chapters is beginning to take shape. Remember Isaiah 1. The faithful city had become corrupt. Justice had disappeared. The vulnerable were neglected. Now, Zion is envisioned as established in righteousness. The book is closing loops opened almost 50 chapters earlier. Then Isaiah 55 opens the invitation even wider. Come, everyone who thirsts. Come to the waters. Those without money are invited to receive. Buy and eat without money and without price. Why spend resources on what does not satisfy? Why labor for what cannot give life? Listen. Eat what is good. Incline your ear. Come. Live. The language of salvation has become an invitation. Not merely a decree concerning nations. Not merely a prediction about kings. People are summoned to respond. Isaiah then speaks of an everlasting covenant connected with the faithful promises given to David. The Davidic theme returns. The servant has occupied the center. But the royal promises have not disappeared. Isaiah's visions of servant covenant, Davidic hope, Zion, and nations are beginning to converge without being reduced to a single simple formula. Nations that Israel does not know will come. The reach is again international. Then comes the call, seek the Lord while he may be found. Let the wicked abandon his way. Let the unrighteous person abandon his thoughts. Return to the Lord, and he will have compassion. Return to our God, and he will abundantly pardon. This is the restoration Cyrus could never accomplish. Cyrus can tell exiles to go home. Isaiah calls sinners to return to God. The difference is everything. Then God declares that his thoughts are not human thoughts, and his ways are not human ways. As the heavens are higher than the earth, his ways are higher. This statement is often quoted in isolation, as though it simply means that God is mysterious. Here, the context is more specific. God's willingness to forgive is larger than human instinct expects. His redemptive purpose exceeds the calculations of those trapped within judgment. The same people who rebelled can be called home. The servant can suffer and yet be exalted. The nations can be invited. The wilderness can become fruitful. Death itself has already been placed under a future promise. God's way of restoration is larger than the ruined people could have designed for themselves. Then Isaiah returns to another image. Rain and snow fall from heaven. They water the earth. Seed grows. Bread is produced. So God's word goes out. It will not return empty. It accomplishes the purpose for which it was sent. The theme reaches all the way back to Isaiah's difficult commission. The prophet had been called to speak even when people would not listen. Decades could pass, cities could fall, exile could come, yet the word would not ultimately fail. Human rejection cannot make divine purpose meaningless. And finally, Isaiah 55 ends with another transformed exodus. You will go out with joy. You will be led forth in peace. Mountains and hills break into singing. Trees clap their hands. Thorns are replaced by cypress, briars by myrtle. The journey home begins to look like creation itself celebrating. The wilderness is no longer merely survived, it is transformed. But the question that has haunted this entire movement remains. What happens after the people return if the servant bears sin? if pardon is offered, if the covenant of peace is announced? What kind of community should emerge on the other side? Will restored Jerusalem finally become the city Isaiah envisioned? Will justice fill its streets? Will worship and righteousness finally remain together? Will foreigners truly find a place within God's purpose? Will Israel live as the servant it was called to be? Isaiah's next chapters give an uncomfortable answer. The return does not automatically produce perfection. Religious hypocrisy survives. Injustice survives. Violence survives. Leadership failure survives. A restored community can still reproduce the very sins that once brought judgment. And that means Isaiah's vision must go farther still. Another anointed figure will announce good news to the poor, liberty to captives, healing for the brokenhearted. Zion will rise. Nations will see its light. But before Jerusalem can wear garments of glory, Isaiah must confront the darkness that remains inside the community itself. The exile may be ending. The deeper battle is not. The road from Babylon could bring people back to Jerusalem. It could not guarantee that Jerusalem would become righteous. That is the tension Isaiah now confronts. The exile has been answered with promises of return. The servant has been described as obedient, rejected, wounded, and ultimately vindicated. The invitation has gone out to the thirsty. The covenant of peace has been announced. Yet when Isaiah turns toward the community that must live inside this restored future, he finds something painfully familiar. The human heart has not automatically changed. Isaiah 56 begins with a command, maintain justice, do what is right. Why? Because salvation is near. God's righteousness is about to be revealed. The sequence matters. Grace does not make righteousness irrelevant. Restoration does not excuse injustice. A rescued people are called to become a transformed people. Then Isaiah introduces individuals who might have assumed they stood at the margins of Israel's covenant life. Foreigners, eunuchs, people who could wonder whether they truly belonged inside the restored community. The message surprises them. The foreigner who joins himself to the Lord is not to say that God will surely separate him from his people. The eunuch is not to describe himself merely as a dry tree with no future. Those who hold fast to the covenant are promised a place and a name. Foreigners who love the name of the Lord and come to worship are welcomed. And then Isaiah describes the temple with words that will echo through the centuries. My house will be called a house of prayer for all nations. This is not an incidental detail. The nations have been appearing in Isaiah from the beginning. They streamed toward the mountain of the Lord in chapter 2. They were included in visions of peace. Egypt and Assyria appeared inside a future blessing. The servant was called to become a light to the nations. Now the restored house of God is pictured as a place whose purpose reaches beyond ethnic Israel. God gathers the outcasts of Israel. And Isaiah says he will gather still others. The restored community is becoming wider. But immediately after this beautiful vision, the prophet turns toward Israel's leaders, and the contrast is brutal. The watchmen are blind. They lack knowledge. They are compared to silent dogs that cannot bark when danger approaches. They dream. They lie down. They love sleep. Others are like greedy dogs that never have enough. Shepherds who should protect the flock instead pursue their own gain. The problem that existed before exile has returned. Leadership can become corrupt again. Religious structures can be restored while spiritual responsibility collapses. History can repeat itself if the heart remains unchanged. Isaiah then describes the death of the righteous. Faithful people disappear, and few seem to understand what their loss means. Meanwhile, those who pursue idolatry and spiritual unfaithfulness continue their practices. The prophet's language becomes severe because he is exposing how quickly a restored people can begin repeating the patterns of the past. Israel had gone into exile partly because of idolatry. Yet idolatrous desire does not simply vanish because geography changes. This is the recurring problem of the second half of Isaiah. Babylon can be left behind physically, but Babylonian patterns of trust can remain inside the soul. The people become exhausted pursuing false sources of security, yet still refuse to say there is no hope. They continue searching for something that can save them. God asks what they feared so much that they became false to him. Silence from God had been mistaken for absence. Delay had been mistaken for indifference. But when judgment comes, the objects of false trust will not be able to rescue them. The person who takes refuge in God, however, is promised a different future. The road is prepared, obstacles are removed, and then comes one of Isaiah's most beautiful descriptions of divine greatness and compassion together. God is the high and exalted one. He inhabits eternity. His name is holy. But where does the Holy One dwell? Not only in the high and holy place, also with the contrite and lowly in spirit. The God whose holiness terrified Isaiah in the temple draws near to revive those who are crushed. This is one of the remarkable movements of the entire book. Holiness does not mean emotional distance. The Holy One opposes pride precisely because he gives life to the humble. God declares that he will not accuse forever. He has seen the people's ways. Yet he will heal. He will guide. He will restore comfort. Peace is offered to the far and the near. But the chapter ends with a warning that prevents the promise from becoming cheap. The wicked are like a restless sea. Its waters keep tossing up mud and dirt. There is no peace, says God, for the wicked. The phrase echoes the end of Isaiah 48. Peace is not merely the absence of foreign armies. It cannot be manufactured by returning to the land. It is connected to restored relationship, justice, and righteousness. Then Isaiah 58 confronts another religious illusion. The people are fasting. They seek God. They appear eager to know his ways. They ask why God has not noticed their spiritual discipline. From their perspective, something seems unfair. We fasted. Why have you not seen? We humbled ourselves. Why have you ignored it? Isaiah answers by examining what happens outside the ritual. On the very day of fasting, people pursue their own interests. Workers are oppressed. Arguments turn into conflict. Religious self-denial exists alongside exploitation. Again, Isaiah exposes the same contradiction that opened the book. Worship without justice, ritual without transformation, devotion without compassion. The people imagine fasting means bowing the head wearing sackcloth and performing visible humility. God asks whether that is truly the fast he desires. Then the definition changes. Break the chains of injustice, untie burdens, set the oppressed free, share bread with the hungry, bring the poor into shelter, clothe the naked. Do not turn away from your own people. Isaiah is not abolishing spiritual disciplines. He is restoring their moral meaning. If fasting produces no concern for the suffering person standing nearby, the ritual has become detached from the God it claims to seek. Then comes the promise. Your light will break forth like the dawn. Healing will appear. Righteousness will go before you. When you call, the Lord will answer. If oppression, accusation, and malicious speech are removed, darkness can become like noon. The Lord will guide continually. The people will become like a watered garden. Ancient ruins will be rebuilt. They will be called repairers of broken walls and restorers of streets. This is the restoration Isaiah wants, not merely stones placed back on top of stones. A society repaired morally as well as physically. Jerusalem's walls matter, Jerusalem's character matters more. Isaiah 59 makes the diagnosis even clearer. The problem is not that God's arm is too short to save. His ear is not unable to hear. The separation has come through iniquity. Hands are stained. Lips speak falsely. Justice is absent. No one brings cases honestly. Violence grows from deception. The prophet describes people moving through society like the blind. They grope along walls. They stumble at midday as though it were twilight. They hope for justice. It does not come. They hope for light. There is darkness. And then the people confess. Our rebellions are many. Our sins testify against us. Truth has stumbled in the public square. Honesty cannot enter. The language is striking because truth is treated almost like a person who has fallen in the street. A society has become so disordered that integrity itself seems unsafe. Then God looks. He sees that there is no justice, and Isaiah says he is appalled that there is no one to intervene. So his own arm brings salvation. This is a major turning point. Human leadership has failed. The community has failed. Justice has failed. There is no adequate human rescuer standing in the gap. Therefore, God himself acts. Righteousness becomes like armor, salvation like a helmet, judgment and zeal become his garments. The imagery will later echo in the New Testament, but here it first describes God as the divine warrior who intervenes when human systems cannot repair themselves. A Redeemer comes to Zion. The covenant promise is renewed. God's Spirit and his words will not depart. Then, after so much darkness, Isaiah 60 erupts with light. Arise, shine. Why? Because your light has come. The glory of the Lord rises upon you. Darkness covers the earth. Thick darkness covers peoples. But over Zion, light appears, and nations come to that light. Kings are drawn toward its brightness. The contrast with Isaiah 59 could hardly be stronger. Truth had fallen in the street. Now Zion shines. The city that had been humiliated becomes visible to the world. Isaiah tells Jerusalem to lift up her eyes. People are gathering. Sons and daughters return. The wealth of nations flows toward the city. Caravans cross the landscape. Ships arrive. Foreigners participate in rebuilding. Kings who once represented domination now serve within the restoration. The gates remain open. The imagery is magnificent, but Isaiah's emphasis is not simply national wealth. The reversal is theological. A city once associated with judgment becomes associated with divine glory. Those who once despised it acknowledge what God has done. Violence will no longer define the land. Destruction will no longer dominate its borders. Walls will be called salvation. Gates will be called praise. Then Isaiah's vision reaches beyond ordinary descriptions of a restored city. The sun will no longer be the ultimate source of light. The Lord himself becomes everlasting light. Days of mourning come to an end. The people are called righteous. The weakest becomes strong. The small becomes great. Isaiah is already moving toward the new creation language that will close the book. But before the vision reaches that final horizon, another voice speaks in Isaiah 61. The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me. The speaker has been anointed. He has been sent, and his mission is described through good news. Good news to the poor, binding up the brokenhearted, liberty to captives, release to prisoners, the proclamation of the year of the Lord's favor, comfort for those who mourn, beauty instead of ashes, joy instead of mourning, praise instead of despair. The ruined cities will be rebuilt, ancient devastations repaired. The people once shamed will receive a transformed identity. This passage is deeply rooted in Isaiah's restoration vision. The poor, broken-hearted, captive, mourning, and ruined represent people whose lives have been marked by loss. The announcement is that God's restoration reaches them. Not merely palaces, not merely rulers, those crushed by the consequences of a broken world. The speaker declares that instead of shame, there will be a double portion. An everlasting covenant is promised. The people will be recognized among the nations as a people God has blessed. Then the voice breaks into joy. The imagery becomes that of clothing, garments of salvation, a robe of righteousness, like a bridegroom prepared for celebration, like a bride adorned with jewels. Righteousness and praise will spring up before the nations, as naturally as vegetation rises from planted ground. But for Christian readers, Isaiah 61 carries another layer, because centuries later, according to Luke's Gospel, Jesus entered a synagogue in Nazareth. A scroll of Isaiah was handed to him. He found the passage beginning, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me." He read of good news to the poor, liberty to captives, sight and release, the year of the Lord's favor. Then he sat down, and he declared that the Scripture had been fulfilled in the hearing of those present. That moment is one of the clearest examples of why Isaiah became so central to the New Testament's understanding of Jesus. The connection is not being imposed upon the passage centuries later without textual basis. Luke deliberately presents Jesus using Isaiah's words to explain his mission. Yet the scene also reminds us to hear the full weight of what Jesus is claiming. Isaiah 61 belongs to the restoration of Zion. It speaks to people marked by exile, oppression, grief, and ruin. To identify with this anointed mission is to claim that the long-awaited restoration Isaiah envisioned is somehow arriving. But Isaiah's vision does not stop with one announcement. Chapter 62 continues with Zion herself. For Zion's sake the prophet will not remain silent. For Jerusalem's sake he will not rest until her righteousness shines like dawn. The nations will see it. Kings will witness her glory. And then Jerusalem receives a new name. Names matter throughout Isaiah. Children received prophetic names. Immanuel carried a message. Shir-Yashub carried a message. Maher-Shalal-Hashbaz carried a message. Now, Zion's transformed condition is expressed through naming. She will no longer be called forsaken. Her land will no longer be called desolate. Instead, names associated with delight and belonging are given. The imagery becomes marital. As a bridegroom rejoices over a bride, so God rejoices over Zion. This is one of the strongest reversals in the book. Isaiah began with Jerusalem compared to an unfaithful city. Now Jerusalem is envisioned as restored to covenant delight. But the restoration is not presented as human achievement. Watchmen stand upon the walls. They give God no rest until He establishes Jerusalem. The city waits for divine fulfillment. Then comes another command to prepare the way. Build up the highway, remove the stones, raise a banner for the peoples. The Lord announces to the ends of the earth, say to daughter Zion, your salvation comes. The people will be called holy, redeemed, sought after, a city no longer forsaken. Think of how far Isaiah has traveled. From a wounded body to a healed community. From a corrupted city to a city called righteous. From a vineyard producing rotten fruit to the promise of new growth. From leaders who neglect justice to an anointed mission aimed at the poor and brokenhearted. From nations threatening Jerusalem to nations coming toward its light. From exile to return. From abandonment to delight. And yet the story is still not finished, because one enormous question remains. How final is this restoration? If Jerusalem is rebuilt, can it fall again? If one generation becomes faithful, can another rebel? If people return from Babylon, can another empire dominate them? If the temple stands again, can corruption return to its courts? Isaiah has already shown that political restoration alone cannot solve the human problem. Even the restored community needed rebuke. Even worship after exile could become hypocritical. Even religious people could oppress the vulnerable. Therefore, the final hope cannot merely be a better version of the old world. Isaiah must go farther. The next movement opens with a terrifying figure coming from Edom, garments stained red. The language of judgment returns. Then the people remember the ancient mercies of God. They remember the Exodus. They ask where the God who once led his people has gone. They cry out for heaven itself to be torn open. They confess that even their righteousness is inadequate. They face the painful reality that humanity cannot manufacture the world Isaiah has promised. And the answer will eventually arrive in the most expansive vision of the entire book. Not merely a rebuilt Jerusalem, not merely a restored kingdom, not merely a defeated Babylon. New heavens, a new earth, a creation where the old order of sorrow no longer defines the future. Isaiah's prophecy is now approaching its final horizon. But before the book can end in new creation, the prophet must confront judgment one final time and answer the question that has been hanging over every chapter since the beginning. How can a holy God dwell with a people who repeatedly fail to become holy? The city has returned. The light has risen, but the final transformation is still ahead. Isaiah has brought us almost to the end. Jerusalem has been accused. Kings have been tested. Assyria has risen and fallen back. Babylon has appeared as the shadow of future exile. Cyrus has been named as an instrument of release. The servant has suffered. Zion has been called to rise. The nations have been invited toward the light. And yet one question remains unresolved. Can the world Isaiah has described truly come into existence while the human heart remains what it is? Because the prophet has already shown us the problem. People can return from exile and still become unjust. They can rebuild religious life and still practice hypocrisy. They can fast while exploiting others. They can speak about God while trusting something else. They can inherit promises without living faithfully inside them. So Isaiah's final chapters cannot merely announce another political improvement. Something more radical is necessary. Isaiah 63 begins with a figure approaching from Edom. His garments are red. He appears powerful. The prophet asks, who is this coming from Edom, from Basra, with garments stained crimson? The answer is, a figure speaking in righteousness and mighty to save. But the imagery quickly becomes severe. The stained garments are associated with judgment. The winepress becomes the central metaphor. In the ancient world, grapes were crushed underfoot so that their juice stained the clothing of those working the press. Isaiah transforms that familiar image into a picture of divine judgment against persistent evil. The vision is disturbing. It is meant to be. Throughout the book, Isaiah has refused to make evil harmless. Oppression matters. Bloodshed matters. Idolatry matters. Arrogance matters. Empires that crush populations matter. Religious hypocrisy matters. If God's promised world is genuinely righteous, then Isaiah insists that evil cannot simply be renamed, ignored, or carried unchanged into that future. Justice requires judgment. But judgment is not the only memory awakened by this scene. Immediately afterward, Isaiah turns toward the mercies of God. He remembers the Lord's steadfast love, the great goodness shown to Israel, the compassion that marked the relationship. God had called them His people. He had become their Savior. Isaiah remembers the ancient story of deliverance. Egypt, the sea, Moses. The Spirit of God leading the people. The same book that looks toward new creation now looks backward toward the Exodus. Why? Because when the present becomes confusing, Israel remembers what God has already done. The people ask, where is the one who brought them through the sea? Where is the one who placed his Holy Spirit among them? Where is the one who divided the waters and led them through the depths? The questions are not abstract theology. They are the questions of a community that knows the stories of past deliverance but does not yet experience the fullness of promised restoration. God acted then. Will he act again? The memory of Exodus creates expectation. If God once made a road through the sea, perhaps he can make a road through exile. If he once defeated Pharaoh, Babylon is not impossible. If he once created a people from slaves, he can restore a people from ruins. But Isaiah wants more than another Exodus. He has already shown us that liberation without transformed hearts does not complete the story. So the prayer becomes more desperate. Look down from heaven. Where are your zeal and your strength? Where is your compassion? The people appeal to God as Father. Abraham may not recognize them, Israel may not acknowledge them, but God remains their Father and Redeemer. Then comes one of the most dramatic prayers in the entire book. Oh, that you would tear open the heavens and come down. The image is almost violent. The barrier between heaven and earth feels unbearable. The people do not merely ask God to send information. They ask for presence. Come down, make the mountains tremble, make your name known. Do something that cannot be mistaken for human achievement. Isaiah recalls that no eye has seen a God like this one who acts for those who wait for him. But the prayer immediately confronts the contradiction. How can sinful people ask a holy God to come near? We have all become like one who is unclean. Even acts of righteousness are inadequate when surrounded by persistent rebellion. The people are compared to leaves that wither and are carried away. Their iniquities sweep them along like wind. This brings the book back to Isaiah chapter 6. There the prophet saw holiness and confessed, I am unclean. Now the community speaks the language of uncleanness. The prophet's personal crisis has become the nation's confession. But the prayer does not end in despair. Yet you are our Father, we are the clay. You are our potter. We are all the work of your hand. Isaiah has used the potter image before to confront human arrogance. Now the image becomes an appeal for mercy. The clay has failed, but it still belongs to the potter. Jerusalem lies devastated in the vision. The holy cities have become wilderness. Zion is desolate. The temple where generations worshipped is burned. Everything once treasured has become ruin. Then comes the question, after all this, will you still hold back? The prayer is asking for an answer to the entire history Isaiah has narrated, and Isaiah 65 presents God's response. But the answer begins unexpectedly. God says he was ready to be sought by those who had not asked. He was ready to be found. He stretched out his hands all day toward a rebellious people. The problem was not divine unwillingness. The people continually provoked him. Their idolatry persisted. They followed ways that were not good. Some even spoke as though their religious practices made them more holy than others. Isaiah again destroys the illusion that religious identity can replace obedience. Judgment remains. But not everyone shares the same destiny. The image of the vineyard returns one final time. If a cluster of grapes still contains juice, it is not destroyed completely. Something valuable remains. So God will preserve descendants from Jacob. A remnant will inherit. The open loop that began with Isaiah's first warnings now reaches toward completion. Judgment never meant that every promise had been erased. The vineyard could be cut back. The tree could become a stump. The nation could enter exile. But the remnant theme protected a future that human failure could not completely extinguish. Then Isaiah presents two paths. Those who abandon the Lord face judgment. Those who serve him receive another future. Hunger is contrasted with satisfaction, thirst with abundance, shame with joy. The division is not ultimately between people who possess the correct national label and everyone outside it. Isaiah has already welcomed foreigners who join themselves to the Lord. The deeper division concerns response to God. And then the horizon suddenly changes. Everything Isaiah has described begins moving towards something larger than restoration after exile. God declares, "I am creating new heavens and a new earth." The former things will not dominate memory in the same way. Jerusalem becomes a joy. Its people become a delight. Weeping no longer defines the city. The sounds of distress do not rule its streets. The vision includes long-life security homes enjoyed by those who build them, vineyards enjoyed by those who plant them. This is the opposite of invasion. Throughout ancient warfare, people built homes that conquerors occupied. They planted vineyards whose harvest they never tasted. They raised children beneath the threat of displacement. Isaiah imagines the reversal. They will build and inhabit, plant and eat. Labor will no longer be swallowed by catastrophe. Children will not be born merely to face disaster. Life will not be organized around the expectations of invasion and exile. Then comes an even more intimate promise. Before they call, God will answer. While they are still speaking, he will hear. The distance lamented in Isaiah 63 is overcome. The people had cried, "Tear open the heavens and come down." Now the relationship is pictured with extraordinary immediacy. Before the prayer is complete, the answer is present. And Isaiah returns to imagery we first encountered much earlier. The wolf and the lamb feed together. The lion eats straw like the ox. Violence is removed from God's holy mountain. The vision recalls Isaiah 11 and the promised ruler from the stump of Jesse. What was opened there is now brought into the final picture. The story is closing its great circles. The stump, the remnant, the peaceable creation, Zion, the nations, righteousness, the holy mountain, new creation gathers these strands together. Isaiah has moved beyond simply asking whether Jerusalem will survive Assyria. He has moved beyond whether Judah will return from Babylon. He has moved beyond whether the temple will be rebuilt. The final answer to human rebellion must ultimately involve creation itself being made new. But there is still one chapter left, and Isaiah 66 begins with a warning against reducing God once again to religious architecture. "Heaven is my throne, and earth is my footstool. What house could human beings build that could contain him?" The question is especially powerful after so much emphasis on Jerusalem and the temple. Isaiah is not saying the temple had no significance. It had enormous significance within Israel's covenant life, but God was never imprisoned inside it. The Creator does not require a building because he lacks a place to live. Everything already belongs to him. So whom does God regard? The humble, the contrite, the one who trembles at his word. Isaiah's final chapter, therefore, returns to the same principle that governed the book from the beginning. Religious action without faithful hearts is empty. A sacrifice offered by a rebellious worshiper cannot manipulate God. Ceremony cannot force divine approval. The temple cannot substitute for humility. The people once honored God with lips while their hearts were far away. Isaiah's final vision still demands a people who tremble at his word. Then Zion experiences another extraordinary reversal. Before labor pains fully arrive, a child is born. Before the expected process unfolds, delivery comes. Can a land be born in one day? Can a nation appear suddenly? The imagery portrays restoration as something human strength could never produce by itself. God does not bring his purpose to the moment of birth and then fail to complete it. Jerusalem is told to rejoice. Those who mourned over her are invited into her consolation. Peace will extend toward her like a river. The wealth of nations flows like an overflowing stream. Again the nations are present. Again Zion becomes a center of consolation. Again divine compassion is described with parental tenderness. As a mother comforts her child, so I will comfort you. The God Isaiah saw high and lifted up is also the God who comforts. The Holy One judges, the Holy One carries, the Holy One redeems, the Holy One comforts. And then judgment returns once more. God comes with fire. Human rebellion is confronted. Isaiah does not allow the book to end by pretending every path reaches the same destination regardless of response. New creation is not indifference toward evil. The very goodness of the promised world requires the defeat of what destroys goodness. Then the final gathering begins. God announces that he will gather nations and languages. They will come and see his glory. Messengers will go to distant peoples. The names Isaiah uses represent the edges of the known world. The purpose stretches outward. People from the nations will bring others toward God's holy mountain. And then Isaiah says something remarkable. From among them, God will take some as priests and Levites. The language pushes the vision beyond conventional expectations. The nations are not merely spectators watching Israel's restoration from a distance. They become participants in the worshiping future. This completes a movement that began almost at the opening of Isaiah. In chapter 2, nations streamed toward the mountain of the Lord. In chapter 19, Egypt and Assyria entered a vision of blessing. In the servant songs, salvation reached the ends of the earth. In chapter 56, foreigners were welcomed, and the temple became a house of prayer for all nations. In chapter 60, nations came toward Zion's light. Now in chapter 66, they are gathered into the final horizon. Israel's story matters profoundly, but Isaiah never allows Israel's restoration to become a small tribal ending. The Creator intends a worldwide witness. Then the promise of new heavens and new earth returns. As the new creation endures, so the people's future will endure before God. From one new moon to another, and from one Sabbath to another, all flesh is pictured coming to worship. All flesh. Isaiah's story has become universal, but the book does not close on a sentimental image. The final verse looks upon those who rebelled. It speaks of corpses, a worm that does not die, a fire that is not quenched. The image is intentionally severe. Later, Jesus himself will echo this language when warning about judgment. Why would a book containing such enormous hope end this way? Because Isaiah refuses to separate salvation from moral seriousness. The new creation is glorious precisely because destruction, injustice, arrogance, and rebellion do not reign there. Grace is not God pretending evil is good. Restoration is not God calling corruption harmless. The same book that invites the thirsty to come freely also warns those who persistently reject the one offering the water. And with that, Isaiah's 66 chapters come to an end. But now we can look back and see the complete journey. At the beginning, Judah was sick. The nation still worshipped, sacrifices still rose, festivals continued, but justice had collapsed. The people honored God while living as though holiness did not matter. The vineyard produced the wrong fruit. Then Isaiah saw the king. The temple shook. The prophet discovered his own uncleanness. His lips were cleansed, and he was sent to a people who would often refuse to listen. Then kings entered the crisis. Ahaz trembled before Syria and Israel. He was told to trust. He chose Assyria. Immanuel entered the prophetic horizon. A child was promised. The hope of Davidic kingship grew larger. Assyria became the flood Ahaz had invited. Yet Isaiah declared that Assyria itself was merely an axe that could not boast against the one wielding it. From the stump of Jesse a shoot would emerge, a ruler marked by righteousness, a world marked by peace. Then Isaiah looked across the nations. Babylon, Moab, Damascus, Egypt, Tyre, every empire that imagined itself permanent stood beneath judgment. Human kings rose, human kings fell. The throne Isaiah saw remained. Then history tightened around Jerusalem. Assyria destroyed fortified cities. Sennacherib surrounded Judah with fear. His spokesman stood outside Jerusalem and asked the question beneath the entire crisis. What are you trusting? Hezekiah carried the threat into the temple. Jerusalem was delivered, but the triumph was followed by another shadow. Babylon. The treasures would be carried away. Descendants of the royal house would experience exile. Jerusalem was saved from Assyria. It would not be permanently spared from judgment. Then, when the story seemed to have reached darkness, one word changed the atmosphere: comfort. A highway appeared in the wilderness. A new exodus began. Babylon was not eternal. Cyrus would come. A foreign ruler would become God's instrument. Exiles would go home. But the problem of sin remained. Then came the servant, called, obedient, rejected, suffering, bearing the iniquities of others, vindicated. Through him, the horizon of salvation stretched toward the nations. For Christians, the New Testament would identify Jesus with this servant pattern in unmistakable ways. The suffering and vindication that seemed paradoxical in Isaiah became central to the apostolic proclamation of Christ. Then Zion rose. Foreigners were welcomed. False fasting was condemned. Justice was demanded. Good news was announced to the poor. The brokenhearted were bound up. Captives heard liberty. And according to Luke's Gospel, Jesus would stand in Nazareth centuries later, read Isaiah's words, and declare that this scripture was being fulfilled in their hearing. That is why Isaiah appears again and again throughout the New Testament. Matthew sees the Immanuel text in relation to Jesus. The Gospels connect Jesus' ministry with the light Isaiah described in Galilee. John the Baptist is presented through the voice crying in the wilderness. Jesus' healing ministry is explained with language from the servant. His rejection echoes Isaiah. His suffering is read through Isaiah 53. Acts records Philip explaining the suffering servant passage to an Ethiopian official in relation to Jesus. Paul draws repeatedly from Isaiah when explaining Israel, the Gentiles' faith proclamation and salvation. Peter uses servant language when describing Christ's suffering. And the final New Testament vision of creation renewed echoes the world toward which Isaiah had already pointed. These connections do not mean every line in Isaiah is a coded prediction requiring a New Testament answer. Isaiah first spoke into real historical crises, real kings, real injustice, real invasions, real exile, real hope of restoration. To understand the Christian reading of Isaiah properly, we must not erase that first context. We must see how the later biblical writers build upon it. That is what makes Isaiah so extraordinary. Its vision operates at more than one scale. A child can be a sign inside a political crisis, while language around Davidic hope grows beyond the immediate moment. A servant can emerge from Israel's identity while also appearing as an obedient representative who restores Israel and reaches the nations. A return from Babylon can be a real historical liberation while becoming part of a larger pattern of redemption. A restored Jerusalem can be a real hope while pointing toward a final creation in which God's purposes extend across the earth. Isaiah's horizons keep opening. And beneath all of them stands one reality: the Holy One of Israel. That title appears repeatedly because holiness is the thread holding the whole book together. Why is Judah judged? Because God is holy. Why can worship not coexist comfortably with oppression? Because God is holy. Why can Assyria and Babylon not boast forever? Because God is holy. Why does sin require something deeper than political liberation? Because God is holy. Why does the servant's obedience matter? Because God is holy. Why must restoration produce righteousness? Because God is holy. Why can evil not survive unchallenged into new creation? Because God is holy. Yet holiness is not Isaiah's enemy of hope. It is the reason hope can be trusted. A corrupt God could not promise a righteous future. An indifferent God could not guarantee justice. A weak God could not overcome empires. A temporary God could not promise new creation. But Isaiah's God is Creator, King, Judge, Shepherd, Redeemer, Father. The one who carries, the one who forgives, the one who makes a road where no road appears, the one who calls the servant, the one who gathers the nations, the one who creates new heavens and a new earth. And that finally explains the journey of Isaiah. The book does not move from an angry God in the beginning to a compassionate God at the end. The same God is present throughout. Holy in Isaiah 6, compassionate in Isaiah 40, sovereign over Cyrus, present with the servant, near to the contrite, comforting Zion, creating the world anew. Judgment and salvation are not competing personalities. They belong to one story about a holy God refusing both to abandon his people and to pretend their destruction of what is good does not matter. The vineyard that failed is not forgotten, it is restored. The stump that looked dead produces a shoot. The city called unfaithful receives a new name. The people driven out are gathered. The nations once feared become part of the horizon of worship. The servant who is despised is exalted. The wilderness becomes a road. The ruins become a city. The mourning becomes joy, and creation itself becomes new. That is the complete story of Isaiah. It is a book about judgment, but judgment is not its final word. It is a book about exile, but exile is not its destination. It is a book about kings, but no human king occupies its highest throne. It is a book about Israel, but its vision reaches the nations. It is a book born inside ancient political crisis, yet its final horizon stretches beyond every empire Isaiah ever named. And perhaps that is why Isaiah continues to feel so immense. It begins with a people who think their religious life proves they are safe. It ends with all flesh standing before the Creator. Between those two scenes lies the collapse of false confidence. Assyria cannot save. Egypt cannot save. Babylon cannot last. Idols cannot speak. Human righteousness cannot heal everything it has broken. Even returning home is not enough if the heart remains unchanged. So Isaiah keeps pushing the question deeper, until finally the answer is no longer merely a better alliance, a stronger army, a restored city, or another political king. The answer becomes salvation itself, a righteous ruler, a suffering servant, a redeemed Zion, a gathered people, and a creation made new. If you followed Isaiah's story to the end, tell us which biblical book or figure should receive the complete documentary treatment next. Subscribe to continue exploring the Bible as one connected story, and watch the next episode to see how another biblical book carries these promises forward. Isaiah saw kings die. He saw kingdoms tremble. He saw cities fall. But beyond all of them, he saw the throne. And beyond judgment, exile, and human failure, he saw a world made new. The kingdoms passed away, the Holy One remained, and so did the promise.